We all know that storms can come out of nowhere. One moment the sky is calm, and the next, lightning cracks, waves rise, and everything you thought was steady starts to shake. Sometimes life feels just like that. Chaos hitting without warning, leaving us grasping for something, anything to hold on to. But what if, even in the middle of the storm, someone was already watching over us? In today's video, Be Still in the Storm, Jesus Keeps Watch, we'll talk about finding peace when everything around you feels like it's falling apart. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. The morning sun filtered softly through the canopy, its rays trembling against the golden leaves. The grove seemed to breathe, alive, waiting. From the worn path between the trees came the sound of footsteps, hesitant and unsure. One by one, wanderers appeared. A fisherman with weathered hands, a mother carrying her sleeping child, a young scholar clutching a small tablet of clay, and a soldier whose sword hung loosely at his side. None spoke. They had followed whispers of a teacher who read beneath autumn leaves, one who spoke of peace not as an idea, but as something living. The teacher sat where he always did, cross-legged on the earth, his robe dusted with the faint traces of fallen leaves. The scroll before him was open, though the wind tugged gently at its corners. When the last of the wanderers had gathered, he lifted his head and looked at them, not as a crowd, but as souls. "You have come," he said, his voice low and steady, "because the noise of the world has grown too loud." The fisherman nodded slowly. "The sea roars even when it sleeps," he muttered. The teacher smiled faintly. "And yet," he said, "beneath every wave there is stillness. The same stillness waits in you." He unrolled the scroll and began to read, not loudly, but with the kind of tone that makes silence lean in. His words were simple, yet they moved through the air like currents of water, brushing against every heart that listened. "Peace," he read, "is not found when the world quiets. Peace is born when the heart learns to listen." A child shifted among the listeners, crunching a pile of leaves beneath her feet. The sound, though small, echoed through the grove. The teacher's eyes softened. "Do you hear that?" he asked gently. "Even this sound, this small disturbance, belongs to the silence." A murmur rippled among the group. The young scholar, puzzled, asked, "How can noise belong to silence, master?" The teacher took a deep breath, letting a leaf drift into his open palm. "Because silence is not the absence of sound," he said, "but the presence of peace. When your heart is quiet, even chaos becomes a kind of music." The soldier frowned, glancing at his sword. "And what of war?" he asked bitterly. "Can even that be music?" The teacher looked at him for a long moment. "A storm may rage," he said softly, "but the roots of the mountain do not tremble. When you stand in that kind of peace, the noise of battle cannot unmake you." The soldier lowered his gaze, his hand falling from the hilt. For a long time, no one spoke. The air felt dense, not heavy but full, like the hush before rain. A leaf landed on the teacher's scroll, its veins catching the light like threads of gold. He lifted it gently and placed it aside. "This world is a constant conversation," he said. "The river speaks, the wind replies, and the leaves record every word. But only those who have learned to be still can hear what heaven is saying." The mother, holding her child closer, whispered, "And what does heaven say to those who listen?" The teacher's eyes shone with something like compassion, or perhaps memory. "It says," he breathed, "I am near." His voice carried softly through the trees, touching something sacred in every listener. The scholar's shoulders relaxed, the soldier's jaw unclenched, and even the child stirred, awake and smiling faintly. Then, without warning, a gust of wind swept through the grove, scattering the leaves into spirals of gold and brown. The group gasped, clutching their robes. The teacher only closed his eyes. The scroll trembled, yet he let it move with the air. When the wind faded, he opened his eyes again. "The wind does not ask permission to move," he said quietly. "Yet it harms nothing that is rooted. When your spirit is grounded, you too will bend and not break." He looked at the restless young scholar again. "Stillness is not about stopping motion, it is about remembering who moves you." The forest seemed to sigh in response. The leaves above them whispered against one another, their sound now resembling the faint murmur of a crowded prayer. Every creature, every breath seemed drawn into the same invisible rhythm. And there, among those who had gathered, people burdened by years, guilt, and unspoken longing, something began to shift. The noise within them quieted, not because the world had changed, but because they were beginning to. The teacher looked across the grove, his gaze reaching even the farthest listener. "Peace," he said again, "is not something you chase. It is something you uncover, buried beneath the fear of being still." He closed the scroll and let his hands rest upon it. A deep quiet enveloped the group, so complete that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Far off, the clouds gathered, gray, solemn, heavy. The air thickened with the promise of rain, yet no one moved to leave. The forest, the teacher, the wanderers, they were bound in a single stillness, waiting for something unseen. The teacher lifted his face toward the sky, though he could hear what the wind was trying to say. "There is a storm coming," he murmured. "Not of the sky, but of the soul." He looked again at his listeners, his eyes filled with both warning and comfort. "Do not fear it," he said. "Every storm teaches what silence cannot." As the first drop of rain touched the earth, the teacher smiled. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch creaked, and the sound was almost like a sigh. The scent of rain filled the grove, sharp and pure. And among the falling leaves and the slow, steady rhythm of rain, the teacher opened his eyes once more and said, "Let us begin." The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. The group sat quietly beneath the wide branches. The only sounds were the soft dripping of water and the rhythmic breath of those who had begun to understand what it meant to be still. Everyone seemed content, except one. A young man, no older than 20, shifted restlessly on the ground. His leg bounced, his fingers tapped against his knee, and his eyes kept darting toward the path that led out of the grove. He sighed loudly, as if the silence itself were mocking him. Finally, he stood up, brushing the dirt from his robe. "Master," he said sharply, "how long must we sit here doing nothing? The world outside is burning, people are starving, and we sit here like stones waiting for the wind to move us." All eyes turned toward him. Some were startled, others annoyed. But the teacher only looked up, calm as the still pool beside him. "Doing nothing," he repeated softly, as if tasting the words. "Is that what you think this is?" The young man crossed his arms. "We're wasting time. If peace comes from stillness, then the world will never find it. People don't need stillness. They need action." The teacher smiled faintly. He reached beside him, picked up a fallen twig, and held it out for everyone to see. "Do you see this branch?" he asked. The young man frowned. "It's broken," he said. "Yes," the teacher replied, "but it was not always broken. It grew straight and proud, always reaching, always stretching toward the sun. It never bent with the wind. It thought bending meant weakness, so when the storm came, it snapped." The teacher placed the twig gently on the ground. "The strong tree learns when to bow," he said quietly. "That is not doing nothing. That is understanding the rhythm of the storm." The young man looked away, jaw tight. "I don't want to bow," he muttered. "I want to fight." The teacher studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward the others. "And what would you fight, my son?" The young man hesitated. "The pain," he said. "The fear, the unfairness of it all. I want to make it right." A kind sadness filled the teacher's eyes. "Even noble hearts can lose themselves in their own fire," he said. "If you fight the storm while it rages, you become part of it. But if you learn its rhythm, you can walk through it without fear." The young man clenched his fists. "That sounds easy for you to say," he snapped. "You sit here safe under the trees while others drown in the Tetumis flood." The teacher rose slowly to his feet. The movement was simple, unhurried, but it carried a weight that made the forest seem to hold its breath. He stepped closer to the young man until they were face to face. "Look at me," the teacher said softly. The young man's anger wavered. He looked up. "Do you think the storm has not touched me?" the teacher asked. His voice was calm, but his eyes were deep, full of memories the others could not see. I have walked through hunger, through betrayal, through silence so heavy it nearly broke me. Yet peace never left. It waited for me to stop running. The young man blinked, caught off guard. "So what do you expect me to do?" he whispered. "Just sit?" The teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sit," he said, "and listen. You cannot mend what you do not understand. Before you change the world, you must first hear the noise within yourself. Otherwise, your voice will sound like thunder, loud but empty." For a while, no one spoke. The forest around them seemed to hum quietly as though agreeing. The boy's breathing slowed. His hands, which had been trembling, fell still. "I don't know how to listen," he said finally. The teacher smiled gently. "Then begin here," he said. "Close your eyes. Breathe. Listen, not for my words, not for the wind, but for the sound beneath the noise." Reluctantly, the young man obeyed. The grove returned to silence. The others followed his example, eyes closed, bodies still. The air was thick with quiet expectancy, like a song waiting to begin. At first, the young man heard only the chaos of his thoughts, the pull of the past, the fear of the future, the noise he carried like armor. But as he sat there, the noise began to fade. Beneath it, something softer emerged, a steady rhythm, faint but real. He opened his eyes slowly. The teacher was watching him, smiling. "Do you hear it?" he asked. The young man nodded, almost afraid to speak. "It's small," he whispered, "but it's there." The teacher nodded. "Peace often starts that way," he said, "like the sound of a single heartbeat in the middle of a storm." The young man let out a shaky breath and lowered his head. For the first time, he felt the weight of his anger lift, replaced by something quiet and new. The teacher turned to the rest of the group. "This," he said softly, "is how we begin to see." The young man remained still, eyes closed again. The forest seemed to wrap around him like a gentle cloak. The teacher returned to his seat beneath the great tree, the scroll still waiting beside him. When he opened it once more, his voice was calm, clear, and steady. "There are lessons," he said, "that only the leaves can teach if we are quiet enough to hear them." And with that, the rustling of branches above became their chorus, the song of the grove rising softly as if in agreement, carrying them deeper into the rhythm of what was yet to be told. The forest had dried under the gentle warmth of morning, the scent of rain fading into something crisp and new. The group still sat beneath the wide branches of the old tree, its leaves whispering faintly in the breeze. The restless young man was quiet now, his hands still, his gaze turned toward the canopy above. Around him, the others seemed lighter too, as if the silence itself had washed them clean. The teacher looked up as the wind stirred the leaves into a soft rustle. "Listen," he said, his tone low but filled with a kind of wonder. "Do you hear what the forest is saying?" The group tilted their heads, unsure. To them it was only the sound of the wind moving through branches, 1,000 faint murmurs overlapping and vanishing. The teacher smiled. "Creation has a voice," he said. "The river hums patience. The stones remember faith. Even the leaves preach surrender." A murmur passed through the group. The fisherman frowned slightly. "But they are only trees, master. They do not speak." "They do," the teacher said, "but not in words. They speak in being. Look around you. Nothing here strives, yet everything fulfills its purpose. The tree does not rush to grow. The river does not fight its current. The bird does not question its flight. Only man forgets how to rest in what is already given." He reached out and caught a leaf drifting past him. Its edges were browned, its body fragile. He held it between his fingers and turned it slowly in the light. "This leaf did not fall in fear," he said. "It fell because it was time. That is the sermon of the leaves, knowing when to let go." The mother, still cradling her child, watched the leaf with quiet eyes. "Letting go," she repeated. "But what if what we hold is all we have?" The teacher looked at her with deep kindness. "Then what you hold will hold you captive," he said. "The tree cannot reach spring until it releases autumn." The words lingered, soft but heavy. A few heads lowered. Someone began to cry quietly. The teacher let the silence stretch. not as emptiness but as space for hearts to breathe. Finally, the young scholar spoke. So you mean everything teaches us, even these branches above us? The teacher nodded. Yes, but we must learn to listen beyond hearing. Every branch stretches toward light, but it grows stronger because of shadow. Every living thing bends to something greater than itself. That is how it becomes whole. The soldier, who had sat apart, resting his sword against the roots of a tree, spoke for the first time. And what of the wind? He asked. It bends nothing, it only breaks. The teacher turned his eyes upward again, where the branches danced against the pale sky. Ah, but the wind is a teacher too, he said. It shows us what is rooted and what is not. The branches that resist will snap. The ones that yield will sing. The wind is not destruction. It is revelation. As if in answer, the wind grew stronger, weaving through the forest with sudden force. Leaves tore loose, spiraling through the air. The listeners gasped, shielding their faces. The teacher stood still, his robe stirring around him, his eyes alight with calm. When the gust passed, the ground was blanketed with gold and brown. The teacher looked around, his smile faint but full of meaning. Even the wind has a word for you, he said. The young man looked at the fallen leaves, the forest floor now a patchwork of surrender. Then, everything speaks? He asked softly. Even pain? The teacher's gaze met his. Especially pain, he said. Pain speaks of truth. It strips away what cannot last. It teaches us to seek what cannot be taken. He knelt beside the fallen leaves and brushed them gently aside until the dark, rich soil was visible beneath. This, he said, is where life hides. The branches reach upward, but their strength begins here, in what lies unseen. The leaves die, but they feed the earth that will raise new life in time. The group watched in silence. The fisherman closed his eyes, remembering the sea. The mother pressed her cheek against her child's hair. The soldier unclasped his sword and laid it flat beside him. Each one felt the forest's pulse, the truth of what it had always known. The teacher stood once more, lifting his face to the light that filtered through the canopy. When you walk beyond this grove, he said, you will hear the same lessons everywhere. The river will tell you when to move. The stars will remind you to wait. The wind will teach you humility. And when the world grows loud again, remember this place, where even silence spoke. He let his words fade into the quiet hum of the grove. A single bird called from somewhere unseen, its note high and pure. The young man opened his eyes, and for the first time, he did not fidget or speak. He only listened. To the branches, to the breeze, to the steady rhythm of his own breath. The teacher watched him, a small smile forming. Now, he said gently, you begin to hear. Above them, the branches swayed again, but this time the wind was soft, less of a force, more of a companion. The forest shimmered in light and shadow, as though creation itself nodded in quiet agreement. The teacher turned his eyes toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills, painting the grove in amber light. There is more to see, he said quietly, more to himself than to the others. The story of surrender is only half told. And as the day breathed its last golden moments, a single leaf detached itself and floated gently down, its fall slow, graceful, complete. The teacher watched it settle upon the earth and whispered, and so it begins again. The light had begun to soften. Long golden streaks slipped between the branches, and the forest glowed as if the sun had chosen to linger a little longer over this quiet gathering. The listeners sat still beneath the great tree, their faces brushed by the falling shadows of evening. The teacher's eyes were on a single leaf above them, half green, half amber, trembling delicately in the wind. He raised his hand toward it, and the crowd followed his gaze. Look, he said softly, at that leaf clinging to its branch. Everyone's eyes fixed on it, curious. That leaf, the teacher continued, has lived its whole season under the sun. It drank from the rain, danced with the wind, and gave shade to the weary. But now, as its color fades, it feels the chill of change. It does not want to let go. It fears the fall. The young man who had once been restless leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "It fears death?" he asked. "Yes," said the teacher, "because it believes falling means the end. It believes the earth waits only to bury it." A hush settled among them. The forest seemed to listen too. The teacher knelt, picking up a brown leaf from the ground, curling and dry. "But this," he said, holding it between his fingers, "is what the leaf does not yet know. The earth does not bury, it receives. What falls here does not vanish. It becomes part of the roots, feeding life unseen. What looks like an ending is the beginning of another story." He placed the leaf back on the soil, pressing it lightly into the damp ground. "Every fall holds a promise," he said. "Every ending carries a seed." The mother, holding her child closer, asked quietly, "But how do we know that promise is real when we can't see it?" The teacher smiled, his eyes kind but piercing. "You do not see the roots either," he said, "but they hold the whole tree." The soldier, who had kept his silence for some time, leaned against his knee, his brow furrowed. "But when life takes everything, when loss feels endless, how can we call that a beginning?" The teacher turned to him. "Because loss teaches us what cannot be taken," he said gently. "The leaf falls, but the tree remains. The branch may be bare for a season, but spring never forgets its way back." He paused, letting the words sink into the soil of their hearts. The young scholar broke the silence, his voice quieter now. "So we too are like leaves?" "Yes," said the teacher. "Each of you is a leaf in God's garden. You rise, you shine, you fall, but none of you are forgotten. Even your falling has meaning, for in the kingdom of heaven nothing good is wasted." He looked up again, watching the trembling leaf. The wind brushed softly through the grove, and the leaf broke free, spinning through the air in graceful surrender. "There," the teacher whispered. "Do you see?" The leaf drifted downward, slow and serene, finally landing among hundreds of others. "That," he said, "is not death, it is obedience. It has listened to the rhythm written into its veins since it was first formed. It trusts the Toyed, ground the same way it once trusted the sun." The group sat in silence, watching the leaf rest peacefully on the earth. The young man who had once resisted stillness now closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The sound of his own breath mingled with the soft rustling of leaves, each one falling in its time, each one surrendering without fear. The teacher rose to his feet, the last light of day reflecting in his eyes. "You must learn from the leaf," he said softly. "When your season of change comes, do not cling to what must fall away. There is beauty even in the letting go." He turned his face toward the horizon where the sun now kissed the edge of the world, the light spilling like honey through the trees. "The same God who gave the leaf its color," he continued, "also gave it the strength to fall. Trust that what ends in his hands is never lost, it is transformed." The mother looked at her child and whispered, "Then even grief can become grace." The teacher nodded. "Yes," he said, "for every sorrow that falls into his soil returns as something new. What you lose in one season will grow into joy in another." The grove had grown quiet now. The sky deepened from gold to rose, and the shadows lengthened across the forest floor. A few of the listeners wept silently, not from sadness, but from understanding. The teacher closed his eyes briefly and whispered a prayer the wind seemed to carry away. "Teach us, Lord," he murmured, "to fall with faith." The young man opened his eyes and looked down at the carpet of leaves surrounding them. For the first time, he saw not decay, but purpose. Each leaf, in its fading, had become part of something greater, each one a quiet sermon. The teacher's gaze swept over the faces before him. "The leaf's journey," he said, "is the story of every soul. You rise from the branch of life, you dance beneath the sun, and when your time comes, you return to the soil of love that made you. The world calls it falling. Heaven calls it home." The forest grew dim as twilight gathered, and the air cooled. The group stayed seated, listening to the steady rhythm of the evening wind. No one wished to speak. The truth had settled too deep to need words. Somewhere above them, the stars began to appear, faint and fragile as the first breath after weeping. The teacher lifted his eyes to the sky and smiled faintly. "The light always returns," he said, "even when we think it's gone." And as the last streaks of sunlight slipped away beyond the grove, a sense of peace descended over them, a quiet understanding that what fades does not disappear. It transforms. It endures. The teacher turned back to his listeners, his voice now a whisper. "There is more to be seen when the night begins," he said. "Stay with me a little longer." He looked toward the soft glow of a lantern being lit in the distance, its flame trembling but steadfast in the coming dark. The grove waited, bathed in dusk, as the first star shimmered above. The story of the leaf had ended, but a new light was beginning to rise among them. The last traces of daylight faded through the branches, leaving the grove wrapped in the hush of coming night. The leaves no longer shimmered gold. They had turned bronze in the dim light, like quiet embers scattered across the earth. The teacher sat beneath the great tree, his hands resting on the open scroll. No one spoke now. The lessons of the day had settled deeply into their hearts, heavy yet gentle, like rain that lingers in the soil long after the clouds have passed. The silence was warm at first, then uneasy. The night carried a stillness that revealed more than it hid. Someone shifted among the listeners. The faint sound of breathing, of hearts wrestling with unspoken truths, began to fill the space where words could not reach. Then a voice broke the silence, a woman's voice, trembling and soft. "Master," she said, her tone fragile as candle flame, "I am afraid." The teacher looked at her, his expression calm but attentive. "What is it you fear, my child?" She hesitated. "Change," she whispered. "Every time I find peace, something comes and takes it away. I'm tired of starting over." The others listened quietly. The forest seemed to draw nearer, the rustle of the leaves above fading into a watchful quiet. The teacher did not answer immediately. Instead, he closed the scroll and set it aside. He looked toward the horizon, where the last shimmer of light was fading behind the trees. "Change," he said finally, "is not the thief of peace. It is its messenger." The woman frowned slightly, tears glistening in her eyes. "But it hurts," she said. "When things change, I feel like I'm losing myself." The teacher nodded slowly. "That is because you cling to what was," he said softly. "But peace lives in what is." He leaned forward, his gaze steady, kind. When the river flows, it never mourns the water it leaves behind. It moves forward, because life is in the moving. The pain you feel is not loss, it's growth stretching its roots through your heart. The woman lowered her head, her shoulders shaking slightly. "But I've lost too much already," she murmured. "My husband, my home, my faith in what tomorrow might bring." The teacher's eyes filled with something deeper than pity. Understanding, he knelt beside her, the hem of his robe brushing the soil. "When you lose," he said quietly, "heaven does not take. It transforms. What was love becomes memory. What was pain becomes strength. What was faith once broken can be made whole again, but never by running from the ache." A soft breeze moved through the trees, stirring the leaves above them. The sound was low, like a sigh. The teacher reached into his satchel and pulled out a small clay lamp. He placed it in the center of the circle and lit it with a single spark from flint. The flame flickered, uncertain at first, then steadied. He looked at the group, his face glowing faintly in the warm light. "Do you see this flame?" he asked. "It does not chase away the dark, it lives within it. Light does not need to defeat the night, it only needs to exist." The woman lifted her gaze toward the flame, her tears catching its reflection. "The same is true for you," the teacher said softly. "Do not fight the darkness in your heart. Let your light live there. It will not vanish." The woman's lips trembled. She took a slow, shaky breath and whispered, "I don't know how to begin again." The teacher smiled faintly. "You already have," he said. "Every breath you take is a new beginning. Peace does not arrive all at once. It unfolds with each act of faith, no matter how small." The young scholar, who had remained silent, spoke up quietly. "Master," he asked, "what if the change is not something we choose? What if it chooses us?" The teacher turned to him. Then it is a calling, he said simply. Change that finds you is not punishment. It is invitation to grow, to let go, to see what you could not see before. He lifted his eyes to the stars that were now pricking through the canopy above. Do you see how the sky has changed? He asked. The light of day is gone, but another beauty takes its place. The stars could not shine until the sun gave them room. A long silence followed. The group sat together in the glow of the small flame. Some wept quietly, others closed their eyes in prayer. The forest seemed alive again, not with noise, but with presence. The teacher reached toward the lamp, cupping his hand around its trembling light. Peace, he said, is not a destination. It is the calm you find even as everything around you moves. It is not freedom from the storm. It is knowing who stands watch through it. He looked back at the woman, whose tears had slowed. Be still, he whispered. He is near. She closed her eyes, her breathing deep and even now. The heaviness in her chest seemed to loosen, replaced by a fragile calm that felt, for the first time, real. The teacher leaned back, letting the lamp's light spill gently across the circle. The leaves above swayed faintly, casting shadows that moved like quiet waves on water. And then, in that delicate silence, a sound arose, a low rumble from the distance. The group turned their heads toward the horizon. Thunder, faint, but coming closer. The teacher's eyes flicked toward the darkening edge of the sky. The air carried the faint, familiar scent of rain. He did not speak of fear this time, nor did he tell them to flee. He only said, "Let the storm come. There is peace to be found even in the trembling." He stood, gazing at the approaching clouds, their edges flashing with hidden light. The flame of the lamp flickered, but did not go out. The wind picked up again, brushing through the leaves, carrying the whispers of something vast and unseen. The group sat quietly, the sound of the coming rain now a promise instead of a threat. And as the first drop fell, cool and clean, the teacher looked to the heavens and said softly, "Even the storm listens." The storm came softly at first, a whisper among the branches, a tremor in the air. The small clay lamp flickered on the ground, its tiny flame shivering against the growing wind. The people gathered close, eyes fixed on that trembling light as if their own peace hung upon it. The teacher stood nearby, still and unmoved, his robe fluttering in the breeze. "Watch," he said gently, his voice steady as the wind began to rise. "Even the smallest flame holds its ground against the night." The woman who had spoken earlier clutched her shawl around her shoulders. "It looks so fragile," she murmured. "It could go out at any moment." "Yes," the teacher said, "and yet it burns." The wind picked up, stronger now, hissing through the trees. The candle bent and swayed, its flame shrinking to a thin, desperate thread. Shadows rippled across the faces of the listeners. A few leaned forward instinctively, ready to shield the light with their hands, but the teacher raised a palm to stop them. "Do not touch it," he said. "Let it fight. Let it prove itself." They obeyed, watching the flame dance and stumble, nearly die, yet every time it seemed about to vanish, it found its shape again. The teacher smiled faintly. "Faith," he said, "is not the absence of fear. It is the courage to keep burning even when the wind says you cannot." The young scholar spoke softly, barely above the sound of the storm. "But how long can it last, Master? The flame is small, and the night is endless." The teacher turned to him. "It will last as long as it remembers what kindled it." He knelt beside the lamp, his fingers hovering near the trembling flame, but never touching it. "You see, strength is not about standing tall against the wind," he said. "It is about bowing just enough to survive it. The tree that refuses to bend will break, but the one that yields will stand again when the storm passes." Lightning flashed in the distance, white and blinding for a heartbeat. The group flinched, their faces lit starkly against the dark. Then the thunder rolled, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to shake the air itself. The child whimpered softly, burying her face in her mother's arms. The teacher looked toward the sky, his eyes calm, unafraid. "The storm roars to test what stands beneath it," he said. "It does not come to destroy, it comes to reveal." The mother looked up through the rain-specked air. "Reveal what?" "Endurance," he said. Faith that endures through trembling becomes unbreakable. The wind surged again, rattling the branches and sending a shower of leaves spiraling through the air. The candle's flame bent nearly flat against the wick, a single breath. Away from darkness. The woman gasped. "It's going out!" The teacher shook his head. "No," he whispered. "It's learning to bow." And indeed, the flame, bent low and trembling, did not die. It clung to life, flickering stubbornly in defiance of the storm's breath. He stood then, tall and quiet, his voice rising above the wind. "Do you see?" he called out. "Faith is not a fortress, it is a flame. You do not protect it by hiding it away from the world. You protect it by trusting it will survive the wind." As the rain began to fall, soft, cool drops tapping against the leaves, the teacher's voice grew gentler. The candle trembles, but it does not curse the wind. It knows its purpose is not to resist, but to shine through it. So must you. The group huddled closer, not out of fear but awe. There was something sacred in that fragile flame that refused to yield. The scholar wiped the rain from his face, whispering, "So even weakness can be holy." The teacher turned to him, his expression serene. "Weakness," he said, "is often the birthplace of strength. When you can no longer stand on your own, that is when grace holds you upright. Endurance is not the body's power, it is the soul's surrender." The storm began to soften, its fury easing into a rhythmic drizzle. The candle flame steadied again, small but sure, glowing against the dark. The teacher bent down and shielded it gently with his hand now, not to protect it, but to honor it. "See how it shines?" he said. "It has learned the wind's language. It no longer fights. It dances." He looked around at each of them, his eyes glimmering with reflected light. The same must be true of you. When the winds of life rise, when loss, doubt, or fear sweep through your heart, remember this candle. Trembling is not failure. It is proof that you are still burning. The soldier, sitting nearest the flame, spoke in a low, reverent tone. "I have fought battles with swords and shields," he said, "but I have never fought like this, with quiet." The teacher nodded. "It takes more courage to stand in stillness than to charge into noise. A warrior may conquer armies, but a patient heart conquers storms." The rain slowed to a soft mist, the world returning to breath and calm. The group sat silently, faces illuminated by the steady glow of the lamp. The teacher placed the scroll beside it, whispering, "Let this light be your mirror. It trembled, yes, but it endured." He stood, brushing the damp earth from his robe. The wind had gentled now into a hush, and the forest once again seemed to listen. "There will be nights darker than this," he said, "and winds far stronger, but the one who gave you the flame watches through them all. He does not ask you to be fearless, only faithful." The woman who had feared change earlier smiled faintly through her tears. "Then I will tremble," she whispered, "and still believe." The teacher's smile was soft, approving. "That," he said, "is the song of every true light." He turned his gaze beyond the grove, where the first pale glimmers of dawn were breaking through the storm clouds. The air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of wet soil and new beginnings. The candle's flame reflected in his eyes, alive and steady. And as the light of morning began to rise through the mist, the teacher lifted the small lamp in his hand, its glow mingling with the dawn. "Now," he said quietly, "come and see what the morning reveals." The grove was calm again, washed clean by the storm. Dew clung to every blade of grass, and the morning light dripped gently through the branches, gold and soft as honey. The air smelled of newness, wet bark, fresh soil, and the faint sweetness of crushed leaves beneath their feet. The candle, though dim now, still burned steadily beside the teacher, its flame unbothered by the quiet. The listeners gathered closer, their faces marked by the night's emotions, but softened by the morning's grace. No one spoke for a long while. The forest itself seemed to hum, a low vibration beneath everything, alive but restful. The teacher sat upon a smooth stone, his eyes turned toward the earth. He placed a hand on the damp soil and smiled faintly. Last night, he began, we saw what the wind can do to a flame, yet the trees stood through it, tall and unbroken. Have you ever wondered why? The young scholar leaned forward. Because their trunks are strong? The teacher shook his head gently. No, because their roots are stronger. He brushed the soil lightly with his fingers. A tree's strength does not come from what you see above. It comes from what is hidden beneath. The deeper the roots, the greater the storm it can endure. The woman from before, the one who had feared change, watched him closely. So what are our roots, Master? He looked up at her, eyes calm but bright. Faith, he said, but not the kind shouted from rooftops. Faith that grows in silence, nourished by prayer unseen. It is in the moments when no one is watching, when you choose kindness, forgiveness, or hope, that your roots grow deeper. The soldier, still holding his sword loosely at his side, frowned slightly. And what of those who seem to fall? I've seen good men, strong men, brought low by despair. Did their roots fail them? The teacher turned toward him. No, he said quietly. But sometimes the soil shifts around us. The world can be harsh. Our roots are not there to keep us from falling. They are there to help us rise again. He dug his fingers gently into the soil, lifting a small clump that held tangled threads of root. See this, he said. One tree's roots do not grow alone. Beneath the earth, they find each other, intertwining, sharing strength unseen. When one weakens, another holds it up. When one thirsts, another passes on what it has, gathered. The young man who had once struggled with stillness stared at the roots in wonder. Then even in silence, they are not alone. The teacher nodded. No one truly is. The unseen things bind us more tightly than the visible. The roots do not boast, yet they hold the forest together. The mother looked down at her sleeping child. So even our smallest prayers, the ones no one hears, they reach farther than you imagine, said the teacher softly. Every whispered prayer, every unseen act of love becomes a root in this world. Heaven sees what earth forgets. He leaned back, letting the soil fall from his fingers. The wind moved through the trees again, gentler now, like a breath of understanding. The grove felt holy, not because of miracles, but because truth had made its home there. The young scholar spoke again, voice trembling slightly. Then why do we look only at the branches? Why do we seek to be seen, if what matters is beneath? The teacher smiled. Because the world teaches you to reach upward first. It praises what grows tall, not what grows deep. But every tree that stretches too high before its roots are ready will one day fall. He glanced up toward the highest branches, their leaves glinting in sunlight. You must let your soul grow downward, into humility, into faith, into love that does not need an audience. Only then can you bear the weight of what heaven gives. The soldier's eyes darkened with thought. And if the roots rot, then the ground must be broken again, said the teacher. The soil must be turned, the dead things cleared away, so that new life can take hold. Renewal always begins in breaking. He stood and walked to the edge of the grove, where an old oak rose from the earth, its trunk scarred, its bark split with age. He placed a hand upon it. This tree has seen storms older than your father's, he said, yet it stands because its roots cling not to the surface, but to the deep rock below. The deeper you anchor your faith, the less you will fear the wind. The group followed him, touching the oak's rough bark as if to feel its secret strength. The young man whispered, Then faith is not about how high we reach, but how far we're willing to go unseen. The teacher nodded approvingly. Yes, true growth happens in the quiet, beneath, not above. That is where grace takes root. The forest stirred again, the rustling of leaves echoing like quiet applause. A few drops of water fell from the high branches, remnants of the night's rain, landing softly upon the soil. The teacher turned back toward the group. When you return to your homes, he said, do not only look at the storms you can see, remember the strength that holds you where no eye can look, for it is not the branches that keep you standing, it is the unseen roots. A quiet peace settled over the grove. The listeners bowed their heads, not out of duty but reverence. One felt something stir inside, a recognition of the small, silent ways they had survived before, the unseen grace that had carried them through nights they thought they would not endure. The teacher looked upon them and saw it, hearts breaking open to something deeper, something steady. "Now," he said softly, "you begin to understand the ground beneath your soul." He lifted his gaze to the far edge of the grove, where a narrow path curved into shadow. "There is something more to uncover," he said, stepping lightly toward the trail. "Come, and I will show you what happens when roots begin to speak." The path curved deeper into the grove, where the trees grew closer together and the air felt heavier, still but full. The forest here seemed to listen differently. The breeze was slower, the rustle softer, as though even nature itself held its breath. The teacher stopped in a small clearing surrounded by tall oaks whose branches wove together like a crown. He gestured for everyone to sit in a circle upon the mossy ground. "This place," he said quietly, "is sacred not because it is untouched, but because it has heard everything, every cry, every whisper, every prayer. Today, it will hear yours." The listeners exchanged uncertain glances. The young scholar swallowed hard, the soldier shifted where he sat, and the woman clutched her child a little closer. Even the restless young man, who had begun to soften in recent days, looked uneasy. The teacher sat at the center of the circle, the morning light spilling across his face. "You carry many things," he said. "Weights the world cannot see. You have learned to stand, to listen, to believe, but not yet to release. Before your roots grow deeper, you must loosen what binds you above." He closed his eyes and touched the ground beside him. "The earth can hold what your hearts cannot." The words fell like a gentle command. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the soldier broke the silence. His voice was low, strained. "I've taken lives," he said. "Men whose faces I still see when I close my eyes. I told myself it was duty, but now I see their fear, their humanity. It haunts me." The teacher looked at him, not with judgment, but compassion. "And what would you say to them if they stood before you now?" The soldier's throat tightened. "That I'm sorry," he whispered. "That I didn't know peace then, but I want to know it now." The teacher nodded. "Then peace has already begun its work in you." The forest remained still, as if absorbing his words into its roots. The mother spoke next, her voice trembling. "When my husband died, I stopped praying," she said. "I told myself God had forgotten me, that silence was his answer. But now I see. I was the one who stopped listening." Tears streaked her face, and the teacher reached out, brushing the back of her hand lightly. "Even silence is not absence," he said gently. "He was near, waiting for you to rest your grief long enough to feel him again." The woman bowed her head, weeping quietly. The child stirred in her arms, reaching up to touch her cheek as if to wipe away the tear. The moment was tender, raw, and strangely pure. The young scholar looked around the circle and spoke hesitantly. "I pretend to know everything," he said, "to hide how lost I really am. I use knowledge like armor, but inside I feel hollow." The teacher smiled softly. "Wisdom begins where certainty ends," he said. "To admit you do not know is not weakness. It is the first breath of understanding." The young man who had once defied stillness sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the ground. When the others had finished, he finally spoke. "I was angry," he said, "at life, at God, at myself. I thought silence was just another way to be forgotten. But now, I see that maybe it's an invitation, and I don't know how to answer it." The teacher turned his gaze toward him, the morning light glinting through the branches above. "Begin by telling the truth," he said. "Not to me, to yourself. Speak not to be heard, but to be free." The young man looked at the earth beneath him, took a deep breath, and whispered, "I'm afraid to be loved." The words hung in the air, simple, unguarded, powerful. The teacher closed his eyes briefly, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "And now," he said softly, "you have begun to listen." The forest seemed to exhale. The air lightened, the sunlight warming their faces. The teacher looked around the circle, at the soldier, the mother, the scholar, the restless youth. Confession, he said, is not exposure, it's release. When you speak what has long been hidden, it no longer owns you. The heart cannot heal what it refuses to reveal. He motioned toward the ground beneath them. Let the earth take your burdens. It knows how to turn what falls into life. Each one lowered their gaze, whispering quiet prayers into the soil. Words of regret, forgiveness, longing, all sinking into the roots beneath them. The sound was like a murmuring stream, soft but alive. The grove itself seemed to hum in response, its silence no longer heavy but full of grace. After a while, the teacher rose to his feet. You have emptied your hearts, he said. Now you must fill them with truth. The sun rises soon, and with it, another lesson. The listeners lifted their eyes toward the east. Through the trees, the faint blush of dawn painted the sky. The light caught the tears on their faces, turning them to gold. The forest around them seemed to awaken slowly. The rustle of wings, the creak of branches, the faint call of morning birds. The teacher smiled. You have confessed what weighed you down, he said. Now learn to walk lighter. The heart that has released its burdens becomes the vessel of peace. He picked up the small clay lamp from the center of the circle. The flame, dim but steady, flickered once more as he held it high. This light, he said, is not the end of darkness. It is the proof that morning is near. The soldier closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The scholar pressed his palm to his chest. The woman looked to the sky. The teacher's voice softened, almost a whisper. Let us rise, he said, for the dawn comes with mercy. And mercy, my children, is the song of the morning. He turned toward the path, where the first rays of sunlight stretched through the mist. The group followed quietly, their steps lighter, their hearts less burdened. The forest welcomed the day, golden light spilling through its branches, each beam falling upon faces that had learned to confess, to let go, to begin again. And as they walked toward the brightness ahead, the teacher spoke gently, more to the wind than to them. Every sunrise is forgiveness made visible. The sun crept gently through the branches, painting the grove in soft amber light. Dewdrops clung to every leaf and shimmered like tiny stars waking from the night. The air was quiet, but not silent, alive with birdsong and the slow breathing of the forest coming back to life. The listeners, still gathered in a loose circle, looked to the teacher, who stood where the first light touched the ground. He unrolled the scroll once more, the parchment glinting pale gold in the dawn. His fingers brushed the edges as though greeting an old friend. The night has passed, he said softly. Now comes the reading that welcomes the morning. The group watched him, their faces bathed in sunlight. The soldier sat with his sword lying harmlessly beside him. The mother's child stirred awake, blinking at the light. The scholar had his hands clasped around his knees, ready, truly ready to listen. The teacher began to read. His voice was gentle at first, like a melody that belonged to the wind. The mercies of the Lord are new every morning. His faithfulness never fades. Though sorrow lasts for the night, joy comes with the dawn. The words hung in the air like incense, soft and steady. Each syllable seemed to breathe into the hearts of those who heard it, filling spaces still tender from confession. The young man who had once struggled with stillness let out a slow breath. It feels different now, he said quietly. Your voice, it doesn't sound like teaching anymore. It sounds like remembering. The teacher looked at him with kind eyes. Because it is, he said. These words were never meant to be studied. They were meant to be lived. The world forgets that Scripture is not just read, it reads you. He turned another part of the scroll and continued. He restores my soul. He leads me beside still waters. He prepares a place where the weary may rest, and he calls them by name. As he spoke, the wind stirred through the leaves, creating a soft chorus. It was as though the forest itself repeated his words. The rustle of the branches, the whisper of grass, even the murmur of a nearby stream, all seemed to echo the truth being spoken. The mother closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her. For the first time in a long time, she felt something deep and quiet rise within her, a peace that did not depend on what she could see or control. The teacher lowered the scroll slightly. "The forest listens," he said. "Do you hear it? Creation responds to the voice of its maker. The trees sway, the birds sing, the river hums. They do not doubt, they do not question. They obey in beauty. That is worship." The soldier lifted his head. "And man?" he asked. "What is man's worship?" The teacher smiled faintly. "To remember," he said. "To see God in the ordinary, to be still long enough to notice that nothing breathes without his will." He looked out over the grove, his eyes reflecting the soft gold of morning. We spend our lives chasing what already surrounds us. We run toward meaning while standing in the middle of it. The scholar frowned thoughtfully. Then why can't we see it? Why does it take so much pain before we finally notice? The teacher's gaze softened. "Because your eyes were not made only to see the world," he said. "They were made to see wonder. Pain does not blind you. It clears the dust from your sight." He turned his face upward, letting the sunlight touch him fully. "Every dawn is proof that heaven still believes in earth. No matter what the night brought, morning always comes. You are not abandoned, you are renewed." His words fell like a gentle rain on thirsty soil. Some wept silently, others simply breathed, as though breathing itself had become an act of prayer. He looked down again at the scroll, his voice quieter now, but with a weight that settled deep into their bones. "Behold, I am doing a new thing. Do you not see it? The desert will bloom, and the wilderness will sing." The soldier lifted his gaze toward the light, his jaw unclenching. "So even the barren places have purpose?" he asked. "Yes," the teacher said. "The barren places teach you to wait. They teach you to trust the rain before it falls. Even the emptiness of your life is not wasted. It is the ground where new life takes root." The woman looked up through tears, her child now awake and smiling in her lap. "Then nothing is ever truly lost." "Nothing," said the teacher softly. "Every sorrow you surrender becomes a seed, every prayer you whisper becomes rain, and every morning you rise as a new creation, proof that the story continues." He closed the scroll carefully and placed it beside the lamp, which still burned faintly, its flame trembling in the morning light. "The word has always lived among the living," he said. "You do not need to climb mountains or cross oceans to find it. It waits in the rustle of leaves, in the quiet of the heart, in the breath you take without thinking." The scholar, moved beyond words, bowed his head. "Then, this grove," he began, "is not holy because I am here," the teacher said, finishing his thought gently. "It is holy because you are listening." The forest brightened as the sun rose higher. The birds sang louder now, their voices weaving with the wind. The listeners closed their eyes, breathing in the sound, the scent, the light, the symphony of a world that had been speaking all along. The teacher stood, lifting the scroll close to his chest. "The word has been heard," he said softly. "Now it must be lived." He looked toward the far edge of the grove, where a faint creak echoed through the stillness. A branch had fallen from one of the trees, snapping softly against the ground below. The sound was startling, yet not violent, like the punctuation of heaven itself. The teacher's gaze lingered on the fallen branch. "Even this," he said, "has a story to tell." He stepped toward it, the morning light falling across his face as the others rose to follow, their hearts open, their spirits still. The forest watched quietly, sunlight glinting off the leaves like the echo of unspoken truth. And so they walked toward the place where the broken branch lay, unaware that the next lesson waited there, patient, silent, already unfolding. The sound came suddenly, a sharp crack splitting through the grove, followed by the heavy thud of wood striking the earth. The listeners startled, some rising to their feet, their eyes darting toward the source. A thick branch had fallen from one of the taller trees, its bark dark with age, its leaves scattered like fragments of thought across the damp soil. The teacher stood still, watching the fallen branch in silence. The forest itself seemed to wait for his response, as if nature had just spoken in a language only he could translate. Slowly, he walked toward the branch, his steps deliberate, reverent. When he reached it, he knelt, resting one hand upon its rough surface. "This branch," he said quietly, "did not fall by accident." The group gathered around, cautious, unsure whether to view the fallen wood as omen or lesson. The mother clutched her child a little tighter. The young scholar peered down, brow furrowed, as if trying to understand the meaning written in the splintered bark. The teacher traced his fingers along the break, where the wood was pale and fresh. "It lived long," he said. "It stretched toward the sky, giving shade, giving shelter. But now its strength has left it. It has fallen, not because it was weak, but because it was finished." He looked up at the listening faces. "Do you see how even what is broken still belongs to the story?" The soldier spoke first, his voice low. "But it's dead now, master. What purpose could it still have?" The teacher smiled faintly. "Purpose does not end with falling. This branch will become a resting place for the birds, a refuge for insects, a home for moss and mushrooms. In time, it will feed the soil, and from that soil, another tree will rise. What dies in service to life has not died in vain." He lifted a small piece of bark that had chipped away. "Even decay," he said, "is part of creation's rhythm. The world calls it loss, heaven calls it renewal." The young man who had once struggled with stillness crouched beside him. "So even when we fall," he said softly, "we can still give something back?" The teacher nodded. "Yes. The broken heart prays more honestly than the proud one. The weary hand comforts with greater gentleness. What you call weakness, heaven calls wisdom." The scholar, thoughtful, adjusted his robe. "But how do we know when it's time to let go? The branch didn't choose to fall." "No," said the teacher, "but it listened. The tree felt the weight upon it, the years, the storms, the strain, and it let go of what could no longer hold. That is mercy. Even creation knows when to release." He stood, brushing the soil from his hands. "Many of you hold on to what no longer gives life. You cling to what has already served its purpose, and you call it strength. But true strength knows when to release what is finished." The woman lowered her gaze, her child asleep in her arms. "Then letting go," she whispered, "can also be love." "Always," the teacher said gently. "There is no love without surrender. The tree loves the branch enough to let it fall, just as heaven loves the soul enough to let it grow through loss." A hush settled over the grove again. The wind stirred lightly, carrying the faint scent of cedar and earth. The teacher stepped back and gestured toward the fallen branch. "Look at it now," he said. "The forest does not mourn its fall. It accepts, it absorbs, it continues. So must you." He knelt once more and pressed his hand against the branch, closing his eyes. "Even the fallen," he murmured, "still worship. Their stillness praises the one who gives and takes away." The soldier exhaled slowly, lowering his head. The scholar wiped his eyes discreetly. The grove seemed to glow faintly in the morning light, a place where endings no longer felt heavy but holy. The teacher straightened and looked beyond the circle of trees. "Come," he said softly, his tone filled with quiet purpose. "The forest has more to teach." They followed him, leaving the fallen branch resting upon the earth. The sound of their footsteps mixed with the rustle of the leaves above, creating a rhythm that felt almost musical. The young man walked near the back of the group, glancing over his shoulder once at the branch. He noticed how it lay not in ruin, but in peace. Its leaves gently stirring, light pooling across its surface like a benediction. A strange comfort filled him. Perhaps the things that fall are not abandoned, he thought. Perhaps they are simply changing form. The teacher led them deeper, into the woods, where the trees grew older, their trunks thicker, their roots stretching like veins across the ground. The air grew cooler here, shaded and still, with the faint trickle of a nearby stream whispering in the distance. The group followed the sound, their hearts lighter now, their steps quieter. The teacher stopped at the edge of the stream, where the water moved clear and slow over smooth stones. He knelt, cupping his hands to gather some, and lifted it toward the light. "Here," he said, "the fallen branch finds its reflection. The same hands that hold the earth also hold the water. The river and the roots, they tell the same story in different tongues." He dipped the edge of the branch into the water, watching as small ripples moved outward, widening across the surface. The reflection of the sky wavered, then settled again into stillness. "The branch has fallen," the teacher said quietly, "but see, its story continues in the reflection. Just because something no longer stands above the ground does not mean it has ceased to touch the light." The group knelt with him, watching the ripples fade. The sunlight shimmered across the surface, golden and alive. The forest felt eternal. Every fall, every renewal, every quiet continuation blending into one vast breathing rhythm. The teacher looked up at his listeners, a faint smile touching his lips. "When you learn to see beauty in what has fallen," he said, "you begin to understand the heart of heaven itself." The young man looked into the stream, seeing his own reflection shift and reform. "It's still me," he whispered, "but different." "Yes," said the teacher softly, "that is how redemption works." The forest around them grew quieter, as though the very air paused to listen. The teacher stood once more, his robe brushing against the wet stones. "Now," he said, "let us walk where the water leads. There are more truths reflected here than words can hold." And with that, they followed the path of the stream as it wound through the grove, its song soft and steady, carrying them onward through the gentle unfolding of the next lesson. The forest floor was damp, soft from the night's rain. The morning light, filtered through layers of leaves, fell in gentle patches across the path ahead. The teacher walked slowly, his bare feet sinking slightly into the earth with each step. Behind him followed the group, quieter than they had ever been. Their journey through the grove no longer felt like wandering. It felt like being led through something sacred, something alive. Every step they took left a mark, faint but certain, upon the muddy path. The teacher stopped and looked behind him. "Do you see?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper. "Each of you leaves a trail, whether you mean to or not. The earth remembers every foot that treads upon it." The young scholar studied the prints with curiosity. "They'll disappear soon," Itakait said. "The wind will cover them, the rain will wash them away." The teacher smiled softly. "To your eyes, yes, but what you leave behind is more than what you see. Even when the earth forgets your shape, the world remembers your presence." The soldier furrowed his brow. "And what if our steps were heavy with mistakes? What if the ground we walked only carried pain?" The teacher looked toward him. "Then you have been given the gift of starting again," he said gently. "Every new step is a chance to walk differently. The ground does not hold grudges. It only receives what you give it now." They continued forward, the forest opening slightly ahead into a wider space where the light fell in golden streams. Birds fluttered through the branches above, singing in uneven bursts that filled the air like laughter. The woman, walking with her child asleep on her shoulder, glanced down at her footprints mingled with smaller ones beside her. "Then, even the small ones who walk beside us," she said, smiling faintly, "follow where we have been." The teacher nodded. "Yes, every heart you meet will carry a trace of your steps. Words you speak, kindness you offer, anger you release. Each becomes a mark upon the path of another." He paused to pick up a fallen twig, snapping it in half. "There are those," he said, "who walk through the world breaking what they do not understand. And there are those who walk mending what others have broken. Both leave footprints, but only one leads toward peace." The young man, who had once struggled with stillness, was quiet for a long while. His eyes traced the winding trail ahead. "When I was angry," he said softly, "I thought my words vanished once spoken. But now I see, they stayed. They changed things. Sometimes I wish I could take them back." The teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. "You cannot take back a footprint," he said, "but you can walk back upon the same ground with gentler steps. Where once you wounded, you can heal. The heart too can be retraced." They came to a part of the path where the ground turned to stone. The footprints faded, leaving only smooth rock ahead. The group hesitated. The soldier asked, "And when the ground no longer records our steps? When we feel unseen?" The teacher stepped forward onto the stone, his voice calm. Then, heaven becomes your witness. Not all paths need to be seen to be remembered. The quiet deeds done in secret, the prayers whispered in solitude, these are the steps that echo beyond the earth. He stopped, looking back at the others. Never believe your journey is unseen just because it leaves no mark on the ground. The unseen trails are the ones that shape eternity. The scholar bent down, touching the stone. Then we walk for something greater than memory. The teacher's smile deepened. Yes, you walk for love, not recognition. For truth, not applause. To walk in the light means to move with purpose even when no one is watching. They walked further until the sound of running water grew louder. The air cooled, carrying the scent of the stream that wound through the trees ahead. The path descended gently until they stood before it. A ribbon of silver weaving through the grove, sunlight flickering across its rippling surface. The teacher knelt beside the water and dipped his hand into it. The current was steady, unhurried. He let the water run through his fingers, then lifted them toward the group. Droplets fell like small sparks of light. The river keeps no footprints, he said, and yet it touches everything. Every stone, every leaf, every root knows its passing. You do not always need to leave a mark to make a difference. The mother knelt beside him, letting the child's fingers graze the water. The boy giggled softly, delighting in the cool sensation. The teacher watched with a tender smile. See how the child plays, he said. He leaves no print, no scar, yet his joy moves through the air like a song. That is how your spirit should walk in the world, light enough to move through it without wounding, yet deep enough to stir hearts as you pass. The soldier stepped closer to the stream, gazing at his reflection. I used to think strength meant leaving my mark, he said. But maybe strength is walking softly. The teacher nodded. Yes. True strength does not demand to be seen. It flows quietly, like this river, shaping what it touches without shouting its name. The young scholar crouched beside him. Then the path is not about how far we go, he said. It's about how we walk. The teacher smiled. Now you are beginning to understand. The journey is not to impress, but to transform. Every step is prayer, every footprint a verse written upon the earth. The group fell silent again, listening to the steady murmur of the stream. The morning had grown brighter, the trees swaying gently overhead. The teacher stood, his robe brushing against the damp stones. He pointed toward the water, where their reflections shimmered, distorted, yet whole. The path you walk will lead you here again, he said, to the place where footsteps end and reflections begin. What you do not understand now, the water will teach you. The river seemed to whisper in agreement, its voice soft and endless. The teacher turned his gaze downstream, where the current curved out of sight into the deeper forest. Come, he said, stepping lightly onto the smooth stones that lined the bank. Let us see what truth waits beyond the reflection. The group followed him, their steps quieter than before, the sound of water guiding them onward like a hymn only their hearts could hear. The water ran clear and calm, its surface a perfect mirror for the sky above. The group stood along the edge of the stream, the morning sunlight flickering across their faces as the ripples played in slow motion. The teacher knelt, first cupping his hands to gather the cool water, letting it slip through his fingers like silver threads returning home. Look, he said quietly. The river reflects what is above it and what stands beside it, yet it keeps nothing for itself. The listeners gathered closer, their reflections merging upon the water's surface, faces of the weary, the hopeful, the broken, and the mended, all gazing back as one. The soldier leaned forward slightly, frowning at his own reflection. It doesn't look like me, he muttered. It's softer, different. The teacher smiled faintly. That is because the river does not lie, he said. It shows not the face you wear, but the one the soul remembers. The mother shifted her child in her arms, peering into the water as the little one laughed, reaching toward his reflection. Then, what does the river see in him? She asked gently. Innocence, the teacher replied. Purity unclouded by fear or pride. The child's reflection is clear because his heart is. He sees himself as heaven sees him. The scholar crouched beside the stream, studying his own mirrored form. And if the reflection is broken, he asked, if we look and see only distortion? The teacher touched the surface of the water, creating small ripples that spread outward. The reflection is never wrong, he said softly, only disturbed. When the waters of your heart are troubled, the image of truth bends, but it does not disappear. Stillness restores what the storm distorts. The group fell silent. The only sounds were the murmur of the current and the faint rustle of the forest breathing around them. The young man who had once wrestled with restlessness stared into the moving water, his expression unreadable. Then, if I wait long enough, he said slowly, I'll see clearly again? The teacher nodded. Yes, but waiting is not idleness. It is faith in motion. The river does not hurry, yet it arrives. The heart that waits learns to see. He gestured toward the stream, and the group knelt beside it, their reflections dancing upon the ripples. Do not look for perfection, he said. Look for presence. Even in the distortion, you will find the divine. They watched as leaves drifted from the trees above, landing softly upon the water's surface. Each leaf caused a tiny wave, bending their reflections briefly before passing downstream. The woman sighed. So easily disturbed, she whispered. One touch, and everything changes. The teacher nodded again. Yes, that is why peace must begin within. If your heart is easily stirred by the passing winds of life, you will never see what lies beneath. He reached into the water again and drew a small circle with his finger. But do not fear the ripples, he said. They remind you that life moves. The reflection teaches stillness, but the ripples teach grace. Together, they form balance. The soldier tilted his head. And what lies beneath the reflection? The teacher looked deep into the stream, his eyes following the flow as sunlight revealed the smooth stones and tiny fish darting below. Truth, he said softly. Truth that is not seen until the surface quiets. That is how the soul is. You spend your life staring at the reflection, but truth waits beneath it. He stood then, the water dripping from his fingers. When you learn to see beyond your reflection, you will begin to know who you are, not as the world names you, but as heaven does. The scholar's voice was low, awed. And what will we see then? The teacher smiled faintly. Light, he said. Not the light that shines upon the water, but the one that shines from within it. The sun shifted higher in the sky, its reflection stretching like fire across the stream. The group watched in silence, their faces glowing in the reflection's warmth. The moment felt weightless, suspended between the visible and the unseen. Then, a soft breeze stirred the surface, and the images began to blur again, shifting, breaking, reforming. The scholar frowned slightly. It's fading. The teacher turned his gaze toward the rippling water. It is teaching, he said. The truth does not vanish when it changes shape. You must learn to see it even through distortion. He looked up at the canopy of trees above them, where sunlight fractured through the leaves, scattering in fragments across their faces. The world will never stay still long enough to give you a perfect reflection, he said. So do not look for peace in the picture, find it in the eyes that see. The soldier nodded slowly, understanding dawning across his features. Peace is not what we look at, he said quietly. It's how we look. The teacher's smile deepened. Yes, the pure in heart will see clearly, even in chaos, even in shadow. The reflection bends, but truth remains. The group lingered by the stream, each lost in thought. The child laughed again, tossing a pebble into the water and watching the ripples spread wide. The sound of his joy carried softly through the grove, mingling with the murmur of the current. The teacher turned to them once more. Remember this, he said. When your life feels clouded, when the world bends your reflection, be still. The water will settle. Truth always returns. He stepped away from the stream and looked downstream, where the river narrowed between two great stones. The water quickened there, bright and restless, catching the light in flashes like glass. Come, he said quietly. There is something the river wishes to show us next. The group rose and followed him, their reflections now stretching long and slender across the flowing water. The forest thickened again as they walked, the stream beside them singing louder with each step. The teacher moved with the ease of one who knew where the unseen paths led. His voice carried softly, over the sound of the water. "There is a place where the river bends," he said, "and the current quickens. It is there that we learn how faith moves, when stillness meets motion." They followed him toward the sound of rushing water, where the calm stream would soon become something wilder, stronger, alive with a deeper lesson waiting to be understood. The forest deepened as they followed the river's winding song. The path grew narrower, the trees taller, their roots coiling across the ground like the memory of time itself. The soft trickle of the stream they had known became louder, no longer a whisper, but a voice, rising and falling like breath. The air was cool, scented with moss and stone. When they reached the bend, the river changed. Its calm current began to churn, swirling against the rocks, breaking its reflection into shards of light. The teacher stood at the edge, watching how the once still surface twisted upon itself. The group stopped behind him, uncertain. The soldier spoke first. "It's the same river," he said slowly. "But it looks different." The teacher nodded. "It is the same," he said. "But now it meets resistance. When still water is forced to move, it must choose how to flow." The young scholar crouched near the riverbank, watching the fractured reflections. "I can't even see myself anymore," he murmured. "Everything looks broken." The teacher's gaze remained on the water. "Not broken," he said softly. "Distorted. The reflection bends when the current is troubled, but the truth beneath it does not change." He lifted a small stone and dropped it into the water. The ripples danced outward, catching the sunlight in fleeting flashes. "So it is with the soul," he continued. "When pride or fear disturb your spirit, your vision twists. You no longer see clearly. You mistake movement for progress, noise for life, and strength for peace." The soldier frowned. "Then how do we make the waters still again?" The teacher turned to him, eyes deep as the current. "You do not make stillness," he said. "You allow it. The river cannot calm by fighting the flow. Neither can you find clarity by struggling against your own heart." He walked closer to the edge, his robe brushing against the wet stones. "Sin, pride, anger, these are the winds that stir the waters. The more you thrash to fix them, the more they cloud. True peace comes not by effort, but by surrender." The young man, who had once feared silence, stared at the water's twisting motion. "But how can I surrender?" he asked quietly. "Every time I try to let go, my thoughts pull me back. It feels like drowning." The teacher looked at him with quiet understanding. "That is because you are still trying to float," he said. "Stillness is not the act of keeping your head above the water. It is trusting that even if you sink, grace will carry you." He knelt beside the river, touching the surface, gently with his palm. "When the river bends," he said, "the current seems chaotic, but every turn serves the journey. What looks like disorder from above is perfect guidance beneath." The mother standing nearby let the water flow over her fingertips. "Then the river knows where it's going," she said softly. "It always has," the teacher replied. "The current was written before the rain began to fall. You cannot lose your way when you are carried by what was made to bring you home." The group watched the water move, its shimmer broken yet beautiful. Sunlight struck the surface in trembling bursts, turning every ripple into a fleeting star. The scholar frowned slightly. "But how do we see truth when everything looks this unclear?" The teacher glanced toward him. "You stop staring at the surface," he said simply. "Truth is not found by looking harder. It is seen when you stop looking through fear." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. When your heart grows still, even a turbulent river will mirror heaven. A hush fell upon the grove. The wind eased, the sound of the current softened, and for a few heartbeats, even the air seemed to listen. The soldier's face relaxed. The scholar's shoulders dropped. The young man's restless hands unclenched. The teacher opened his eyes again and smiled. "The water cannot hold stillness unless the wind above it quiets," he said. "So it is with the soul. Calm within will calm without. He looked up at the canopy where the breeze had died, and sunlight filtered gently through unmoving leaves. "Listen," he whispered. "The forest has understood." They did. The stillness was deep now, not empty, but full. It was the kind of silence that seemed to breathe, steady and alive. Even the sound of the river had softened into a low hum, steady as a heartbeat. The teacher stood and looked down the river's path, where the bend continued into deeper light. "When the water's clear," he said quietly, "the truth returns. Not a new truth, but the one that was always there, waiting beneath the ripples." The scholar looked up, eyes bright. "Then peace was never lost," he said, "only hidden." The teacher nodded. "Exactly. And when you find it again, you will realize it never left you." The young mother smiled faintly, the child in her arms now asleep against her shoulder. The soldier's eyes softened, reflecting something human that had long been buried beneath duty. The young man breathed slowly, almost reverently. The teacher stepped back from the water's edge. "There will be times," he said, "when the river bends so sharply you cannot see what lies ahead. Do not fear the turn. The current knows the way. What looks like loss is only direction." He lifted his eyes toward the path of light stretching across the river's curve. "There is a place where the waters rest again," he said. "Beyond this bend lies a pool where the reflections return whole. There we will see the face of peace clearly." The group followed his gaze, their hearts quiet now, their burdens lighter. The forest shimmered in the still morning light, each leaf glinting as though heaven itself had brushed it with gold. The teacher began to walk again, his steps soft and steady beside the murmuring river. "Come," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "The lesson of clarity awaits where the waters rest." And so, with hearts newly still and eyes open once more, they followed him along the winding bank where the sound of the rushing stream began to fade, and the promise of calm ahead drew them onward through the forest of light. The river widened as they walked, its once restless current beginning to slow. The sound softened from a rush to a hum, like a song that had forgotten its urgency. The air grew warmer, and sunlight broke freely through the branches, scattering across the ground in trembling gold. When they reached the clearing, the forest opened before them to reveal a pool, a perfect mirror of light and sky, its surface still as glass. The teacher stopped at its edge. The others followed, standing in silent awe. The water reflected everything above it, the clouds drifting lazily across the blue, the swaying leaves, the faces of those who looked down. But it distorted nothing. For the first time, the reflection was whole. The young scholar knelt and whispered, "It's so clear. I can't tell where the water ends and the sky begins." The teacher nodded. "That is what peace looks like when it understands itself," he said. "No separation, no confusion, only harmony between above and below." The soldier leaned on his knee, gazing at the still surface. "It doesn't even move," he said. "How does something so still stay alive?" The teacher smiled. "It is not lifeless," he said. "It moves, but too deeply for your eyes to see. Stillness is not the absence of life. It is the fullness of it, resting." The mother, holding her sleeping child, stepped closer to the pool. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "But if we touched it, it would ripple," the teacher said. "Because truth reacts to presence. The moment you come close, it reveals how gently or how violently you move through the world." He reached out a single hand and dipped his fingers into the pool. The water stirred slightly, sending a slow ring of ripples outward, widening across the mirrored sky. "See," he said, "the water does not resist the touch. It welcomes it, transforms it, and then returns to peace. That is the way of a wise heart." The young man who had once feared stillness crouched beside him, staring into the water. "I want that," he said quietly, "to feel everything but still return to peace." The teacher looked at him, eyes soft but steady. "Then stop fighting what you feel," he said. "Stillness does not ignore emotion. It listens to it. without being moved by it. The group lingered around the pool. The forest was quiet now, every sound softened by the calm around them. Even the birds sang slower, as though reluctant to disturb the air. The scholar traced his finger over the water's surface, watching the tiny circles fade back into perfection. "It always returns," he said. "Yes," said the teacher, "because truth always returns to itself. No matter how much it is disturbed, no matter how long it is troubled, it finds its center again. That is the secret of peace." He stepped back and gestured to the pool. "The world you live in will always be noisy, full of motion and turmoil. But here," he said, pointing to his chest, "here is your pool of clarity, the place where heaven and heart reflect each other without distortion." The soldier exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the mirrored sky. "Then peace isn't something we chase," he said. "It's something we uncover." The teacher's smile deepened. "Yes, peace is not found, it is remembered." A silence settled over them, deep and luminous. Each one stood still, their reflections gazing back from the pool like versions of themselves that understood what their hearts had only begun to learn. The mother sat down on a stone, rocking her child gently. The scholar closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the breeze. The soldier removed his sandals, stepping barefoot into the cool shallows, as if testing the truth with his body. The young man remained at the teacher's side, breathing slowly, his eyes steady upon the water. Then, without a word, the teacher closed his eyes. His breathing slowed, even and quiet. The others felt it, an invisible rhythm, like the forest itself had paused to breathe with him. The moment stretched, timeless, weightless. The pool mirrored everything, sky above, earth below, faces still and calm. And in that stillness, it seemed to speak. Not in words, but in understanding. The air thickened with peace, a peace that felt alive, almost sentient. The teacher finally opened his eyes. "Now," he said softly, "you are hearing without sound." The young scholar's brow furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" He gestured toward the pool. "Listen," he said. The group obeyed. There was no noise, no bird call, no wind, no rustle of branches, only silence. Yet it wasn't empty. It was full. The silence itself spoke of grace, of forgiveness, of the quiet mercy that binds all living things together. "This," the teacher said, "is the language of stillness. When words fall away, what remains is truth. It speaks in every heart willing to stop long enough to hear." The soldier, tears gathering in his eyes, whispered, "So all this time, he's been speaking, and we just never stopped long enough to listen." The teacher nodded slowly. "He has never stopped. You only needed to be still enough to remember his voice." The wind began to stir again, lightly this time, rippling the pool in gentle waves. The reflections blurred, but the peace remained. The forest exhaled. The listeners breathed with it. The teacher looked toward the horizon where the light had begun to shift, softening toward gold. "Come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let us sit in this silence a little longer. The next lesson is not one I can speak." He sat by the water's edge, his hands folded loosely in his lap. The others followed one by one, forming a circle around the pool. The silence deepened again. Not a void, but a presence. The teacher closed his eyes, and the stillness became a prayer, wordless, pure, alive. And then, as if heaven itself wished to punctuate the moment, a child's laughter echoed through the clearing, light, sudden, joyful. The group opened their eyes. The mother's child had awakened, reaching for the water, giggling as his fingers touched the ripples. The teacher smiled, the sound of laughter filling the air like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Even stillness," he said softly, "has joy within it." The ripples spread, the water shimmering with light and laughter. The forest seemed to hum again, alive, awake, grateful. And as they watched the child's laughter dance across the surface of the pool, the teacher lifted his gaze toward the deeper woods. "There is a place," he said, "where stillness and joy walk together." He stood slowly, eyes bright with the reflection of the pool. "Come." he said gently. It's time you see where peace becomes praise. The sound of laughter rippled through the grove like sunlight skipping across water. It was light, uncontained, and perfectly out of rhythm with the stillness. Yet it didn't disturb it. It completed it. The small child, barefoot and curious, toddled closer to the pool, her reflection chasing her every movement in the water below. The others watched quietly, a few smiling through the quiet reverence that had settled over the morning. The teacher, seated near the pool's edge, watched the child with a tenderness that carried both love and understanding. There, he said softly, is what heaven looks like when it remembers how to laugh. The young scholar tilted his head, puzzled. Master, how can laughter be holy? Isn't holiness about silence and reverence? The teacher turned to him. Reverence is not silence, he said. It is awareness, and awareness does not always whisper, it sometimes sings. The child crouched beside the water, scooping up handfuls and letting them fall back in a shimmering cascade. Her laughter grew louder as the droplets sparkled in the sunlight. See, the teacher said, the child plays with the same water that once reflected heaven, and still heaven smiles. Joy is not separate from stillness. It springs from it. The soldier crossed his arms, half smiling but hesitant. She's unafraid, he said. Not careful at all. When I was a child, I was told not to get too close to rivers. Too dangerous. Fear teaches boundaries, the teacher said, but joy teaches belonging. The child knows what the world has forgotten, that everything here was made for communion, not control. She does not own the water. She celebrates with it. The woman, her own child asleep in her lap, watched with quiet wonder. And yet she trusts it completely, she said. She doesn't even think to doubt. The teacher's eyes softened. That is why heaven calls the pure in heart blessed, he said. They see not what the world demands of them, but what the world offers them. To such belongs the kingdom of peace. The scholar looked thoughtful, tracing lines in the dirt with a small stick. Then faith must be like a child's laughter, light, trusting, unguarded. Yes, said the teacher, faith is the courage to delight in what you do not fully understand. The child's laughter echoed again, filling the air with a melody that felt older than time. Even the forest seemed to bend toward it. The birds paused, the leaves stilled, the pool shimmered brighter. The moment was weightless. Then, in her play, the child slipped, her tiny foot sliding on a slick stone, and she tumbled forward into the shallow water. The group gasped, but before anyone could move, the teacher was already there. He reached out, catching her gently by the arm and lifting her up. She blinked, startled for only a second, then laughed even harder, drenched but unharmed. The others exhaled in relief, a wave of laughter following hers. The teacher smiled. You see, he said, even in the falling there is joy. Fear belongs only to those who forget who stands near. He set the child down, brushing the wet hair from her face. She grinned up at him, eyes bright as the morning sky. You're not angry? She asked. Angry? The teacher laughed softly. No, my little one. The world will scold you often enough, but heaven rejoices in your laughter, even when it comes with a splash. The child giggled again and threw her arms around his neck. The forest seemed to hold its breath at the sight. The teacher embraced her gently, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The kingdom of heaven, he whispered, belongs to such as these. The young man who had once wrestled with silence spoke from the back of the group. So, maybe stillness isn't the absence of sound, he said. Maybe it's the presence of peace, even in laughter. The teacher nodded, his voice low and full of warmth. Yes, stillness does not forbid joy. It gives it space to live. Joy without stillness becomes noise. Stillness without joy becomes emptiness. Together, they form the music of faith. The soldier smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time we learn to laugh again. The teacher's eyes sparkled. You will, he said. When you remember that laughter is not a rebellion against pain, it's proof that pain never had the final word. The group stood in silence, watching as the child spun in circles, her wet robe clinging to her legs, her laughter rising like incense to the sky. It was pure, unrestrained, free. the kind of sound that healed something deep inside those who heard it. The mother looked at her sleeping son and whispered, "It's strange. Her laughter feels like prayer." The teacher looked at her. "That's because it is," he said. "Every sound that rises from love returns to heaven as worship." He turned his gaze toward the sun now high above the trees. And just as laughter fills the morning, gratitude fills the heart. When you have known peace and seen joy, there is only one thing left to do: give thanks. He looked back at the group, his smile gentle but sure. "Come," he said, "let us share a meal. Gratitude is the feast of those who have seen light." The group followed him toward a shaded clearing nearby. The air was cool beneath the trees, the ground carpeted with soft grass and fallen leaves. The young scholar gathered fruit from a nearby vine, the soldier helped arrange stones for seating, and the mother laid out a small cloth she had carried in her satchel. The teacher sat at the center, the child now resting quietly at his side. "Every table," he said, "is an altar when hearts are thankful. Food fills the body, but gratitude fills the soul." They began to eat in silence, each bite a reminder of simple blessings: the warmth of the sun, the cool water of the river, the gift of breath. There was no hurry, no chatter, only peace. And when they had eaten enough, the teacher looked up at them and said, "Today you have learned the sound of heaven's laughter. Tomorrow you will learn its song." He looked toward the forest beyond, where a field shimmered in the distance, a meadow of light swaying beneath the breeze. "There," he said softly, "the earth itself sings." The clearing was calm and dappled with sunlight. The gentle hum of the forest wrapped around them like a hymn. The group sat in a loose circle beneath the canopy, their faces softened by the peace that lingered from laughter. The air smelled faintly of wild honey and damp earth, and the leaves above shifted just enough to let the light through in trembling patterns. The teacher sat at the center, a loaf of bread resting on a folded cloth before him. It was simple, baked coarse, dark around the edges, marked by the lines of human hands. The soldier had gathered it from his satchel, the mother had offered dried figs, and the scholar had found a handful of berries nearby. Together, they formed a meal humble enough to fit in any day's hunger. The teacher looked at each of them, his eyes full of quiet joy. "Bread," he said softly, "is the oldest story of humankind. It begins as grain, crushed and buried, only to rise again as nourishment. Do you see? Even in its making, it mirrors life itself." He lifted the loaf and held it in both hands. "This," he continued, "feeds the body. But what of the soul? The soul too hungers, and no field, no oven, no table can fill it." The group watched as he broke the bread in half. The sound was small, but it seemed to echo beneath the trees. The aroma drifted through the air, warm and earthy. "The body hungers daily," he said, "but the soul hungers for meaning, for peace, for belonging. It is not enough to eat, you must also remember what feeds you." He handed a piece to the woman first, who tore a smaller piece and gave it to her child. The soldier received his next, then the scholar, then the young man. Each one took it with quiet reverence, their fingers brushing the rough surface as though touching something sacred. The teacher took his own piece last. "When you share bread," he said, "you are not just feeding one another, you are reminding each other that you are not alone. No one eats by themselves in the kingdom of heaven." They ate in silence for a time, the forest moving gently around them. The sound of the wind through the trees became almost like the rhythm of breathing, a slow inhale, a slower exhale. The bread was plain, yet it tasted fuller than any feast they could remember. The scholar looked at the teacher. "You said bread mirrors life," he said. "But if it must be broken to nourish, does that mean we must be broken too?" The teacher met his gaze, his expression steady. "Yes," he said softly. "For what remains whole often remains untouched. It is through breaking that we become what we were meant to be. The heart that has been broken learns compassion. The soul that has been tested learns faith." The soldier swallowed slowly, looking down at the piece of bread in his hand. "Then our pain is not wasted?" The teacher shook his head. "Never wasted. Even the crumbs have purpose. The smallest act of kindness, the quietest word of forgiveness, these are the crumbs heaven gathers." He leaned back, resting his hand upon the earth. "When I bless this bread," he said, "I do not bless the grain alone. I bless the hands that sowed it, the rain that fell upon it, the fire that baked it, and the hearts that share it. All creation takes part in the feeding of life." The young man, who had learned stillness through struggle, looked at his own portion of bread. "So when I feed another, I feed something greater than both of us?" "Yes," the teacher said. "You feed the body of love itself." A long silence followed, filled only by the soft sound of leaves swaying overhead. The forest felt alive with something invisible but present, gratitude perhaps, or grace. The air thickened, golden with meaning. The woman wiped her child's mouth gently. "It's strange," she said. "This bread doesn't fill me with heaviness. It feels like rest." The teacher smiled. "Because you are tasting more than wheat," he said. "You are tasting peace." The group sat together until their hunger was quieted, though the bread had barely been enough to fill their hands. Yet none of them felt lacking. The teacher closed his eyes briefly, whispering a prayer that carried in the wind. "Thank you, Father, for the seed, the soil, and the hunger that leads us back to you." As he spoke, the forest shifted. A low rumble echoed in the distance, deep, rolling, and steady. The birds went silent. The air, once warm and golden, began to cool. The light dimmed as clouds gathered above the treetops, their gray edges curling like smoke. The scholar looked toward the horizon. "A storm," he said quietly. The teacher's gaze followed his. "Yes," he murmured. "Every feast is followed by testing. The fullness of spirit is always met by the wind." The soldier's hand instinctively found the hilt of his sword, though the teacher's calm presence seemed to hold him still. "Should we take shelter?" he asked. The teacher shook his head gently. "Do not fear what approaches. Storms do not come to destroy the faithful. They come to remind them where they are rooted." The wind began to move through the trees, harder now, bending the branches and scattering the fallen leaves. The pool they had left behind rippled violently as the first drops of rain struck its surface. The mother clutched her child closer, shielding him beneath her shawl. The teacher stood, the last rays of sunlight flickering across his face before the clouds swallowed them whole. His robe fluttered against the wind, his eyes fixed on the ski. "The lesson of peace," he said, "is not learned in calm water, but in the storm that follows it." He turned to the group, his expression serene. "Come," he said softly. "We must stand in what we have learned. The bread that fed us will give us strength." Thunder cracked in the distance, low and echoing through the valley. The forest trembled, the wind howled, and yet there was something unshakable in the teacher's voice as he said, "Be still. The one who fed you will keep you." And with that, they stepped away from the clearing, walking toward the sound of rain and the darkening horizon, where the storm awaited them with lessons only the brave of heart could understand. The first drops of rain struck the earth like whispers, gentle, scattered, uncertain. The forest darkened under the heavy sky, and the soft peace of the meal began to fade into unease. The leaves above trembled as wind moved through them, and the once still pool shivered under the first wave of falling water. The group huddled together, drawing their cloaks close, eyes turned toward the clouds that gathered like a deepening thought. The teacher stood unmoving. His robe clung to him as rain began to fall harder, tracing silver lines down his face. His eyes were lifted, not in defiance but in calm recognition. The soldier stepped forward, gripping his sword as thunder rolled like a growl across the heavens. "Master," he said, raising his voice above the storm, "we should find shelter." The teacher turned to him, his voice firm yet gentle, carrying even through the wind. "The storm is not against us," he said. "It is speaking. Listen." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Lightning flashed across the sky, splitting the horizon into blinding white and shadow. The child began to cry softly, and the mother held him close, whispering words of comfort. The wind tore through the grove, bending the trees until their branches groaned. Still, the teacher did not move. His voice rose, calm yet resonant, cutting through the roar of thunder. You have learned to find peace in silence, he said. Now you must learn to find it in noise. The young scholar shielded his eyes against the rain. But how can we be still when everything shakes? He cried out. The teacher's gaze fell upon him, unwavering. Stillness is not the absence of chaos, it is the presence of faith, he said. When the world trembles, stand on what does not. Thunder cracked again, louder now, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The soldier took a step back, the scholar stumbled, and the mother knelt with her child. But the teacher remained rooted, his hand outstretched toward the sky. The storm does not come to destroy, he said. It comes to cleanse what stillness has revealed. Rain poured harder, soaking them through. The sound was deafening, a relentless drumming upon leaves, earth, and flesh. Yet within that roar, something strange happened. The fear began to thin, replaced by awe. The storm's voice was vast, terrible, yet rhythmic, like a heartbeat far greater than their own. The teacher's voice rose above it, deep and sure. You fear what you cannot control, he said. But control was never your calling. Faith was. When thunder speaks, it reminds you how small you are and how deeply you are held. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face for a brief moment. There was no fear in his eyes, only light reflected back to light. The young man who had once resisted silence fell to his knees, the rain plastering his hair to his face. I can't hear you, he cried, his voice breaking against the storm. I want to, but I can't. The teacher knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. He is not lost in the noise, he said. He is the voice within it. The young man wept, his words swallowed by the thunder. The teacher leaned closer, speaking directly into his ear. Faith is not the quiet after the storm. It is the heartbeat that endures through it. The storm howled in reply, its voice mighty and wild, bending trees until they seemed to bow in reverence. The rain was no longer cold. It was cleansing, washing the earth, clearing the air of everything heavy. The mother lifted her child and whispered, He's not afraid anymore. The teacher smiled faintly through the rain, because he listens deeper than his fear. He stood again, the storm raging around him, his voice now a command that felt like both prayer and power. The sky shakes, but heaven does not fall. The waters rise, but the foundation remains. Be still, not because the storm has ended, but because I'm here. Lightning burst across the sky in silent answer, painting the grove in white fire. For a single instant, everything was light, trees, faces, raindrops frozen mid-air, even the smallest breath illuminated. Then, just as quickly, the brightness vanished, replaced by a deep rumble that faded slowly into distance. The rain began to soften, the roar became a murmur. The wind gentled into a sigh. The trees straightened, dripping, renewed. The storm had spent itself, the world exhaled. The soldier lowered his sword. The scholar lifted his face to the clearing sky. The young man opened his hands, palms upward, as if feeling the last drops like blessings. The mother held her child, who now slept peacefully against her shoulder. The teacher looked up one final time at the clouds breaking apart, their edges touched by sunlight. The storm spoke, he said quietly. And now the earth understands. The forest glistened, washed clean, the air sharp and sweet. A single beam of light pierced through the canopy and fell upon the teacher, then spread, warming each of them in turn. Do you see? He asked softly. Even thunder serves peace. The sky's anger is heaven's renewal. The world must tremble before it can be still again. The scholar, voice hushed with reverence, said, The storm did not take our peace. It revealed it. The teacher nodded. Yes, you cannot know the strength of your faith until it stands against the wind. The group stood together, faces lifted toward the light. The trees dripped gently, their leaves whispering like prayers answered. The forest was reborn. The teacher turned his gaze downstream, where the river, once violent, now flowed clear and calm again. Come, he said, smiling faintly. There is one more truth the river must show us, one only seen after the rain. And as they followed him along the wet earth, stepping through puddles that mirrored the clearing sky, the light grew brighter and the world felt new again, washed, renewed, reborn. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to the world like breath on glass. The forest glistened, every branch and leaf heavy with drops of water that caught the light like tiny stars. The air was thick with the scent of soil, new, raw, alive. Mist rose from the ground, curling upward into the soft gold of the morning sun. The river, once roaring in fury, now flowed clear and steady, whispering instead of shouting. The group stood along its edge, silent. The teacher crouched beside the water, dipping his fingers into the current. It was cool again, calm again, yet stronger than before. "Do you see?" he asked softly, his voice just above the sound of the flowing stream. "The river is never the same after the rain. It carries more now, more life, more depth, more clarity. The storm did not destroy it. It made it new." The soldier knelt nearby, his reflection rippling. "It feels different," he said, "like the water itself remembers." "It does," the teacher replied. "Every drop that fell from the sky becomes part of the river. The same is true of you. The storms you endure do not vanish. They flow within you, changing your shape without taking your strength." The young scholar brushed his hand across a wet leaf, watching the droplets fall. "So the storm wasn't punishment," he said quietly. "It was preparation." The teacher smiled faintly. "Yes, you cannot hold light without first learning how to survive the dark. The storm teaches what the calm cannot." He rose, looking across the water where sunlight shimmered like liquid gold. "There are things you only see when the world has been washed clean. After pain, vision sharpens. After sorrow, joy deepens. The heart that has been broken learns to feel what the unbroken never will." The young man who once feared stillness knelt beside the river and touched the water with his fingertips. "It's moving faster now," he said, "like it's eager to go somewhere." The teacher nodded. "That is how peace works," he said. "It does not sit still forever. It moves, it spreads. The peace within you must become peace around you, or it will stagnate like water that refuses to flow." The mother, holding her sleeping child, looked down at the reflection of both their faces. "Then peace must be shared to stay alive." "Yes," the teacher said gently. "It was never meant to be kept." The forest around them began to hum again. The insects returning to their songs, the birds emerging from their hidden perches. Life moved forward without apology. Every sound seemed sharper now, every color brighter, as if the world itself had taken a deep breath. The scholar looked toward the sky, where the clouds were parting, letting blue spill through like revelation. "It's strange," he said. "The storm felt endless when we were in it, but now it feels small, like it never had the power we thought it did." The teacher turned toward him. "That is the gift of perspective," he said. "Peace does not erase storms, it puts them in their place. What felt like the end becomes a beginning when seen through the eyes of faith." He walked closer to the river's edge, his feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. "Do you hear it?" he asked. The group listened. The river murmured softly, winding between the stones. Beneath the surface, small fish darted in flashes of silver, and the rhythm of water against rock was steady, soothing. "It's singing," the child said suddenly, waking from sleep. The teacher smiled. "Yes," he said. "The river sings because it has survived." The soldier exhaled slowly, almost in reverence. "Then we sing too," he said, "even if our voices tremble." The teacher's eyes softened. "Especially then," he replied. "Heaven does not wait for perfect voices, it listens for honest ones." The mother smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "And what if the song fades when we leave this place?" The teacher stepped forward, placing his hand over his heart. "Then carry the rhythm here," he said. "The river within you will never dry. When life grows loud again, remember this sound, the quiet after the storm, the calm that carries strength." He knelt again, cupping the clear water in his hands, then let it pour slowly back into the river. "Peace is not found by escaping the storm," he said softly. "It is found by remembering who calms it." The group watched the ripples spread outward, merging into the current until they disappeared. The sound of water filled the air like breath, steady, eternal. The young scholar spoke after a long silence. "So the storm, the stillness, the river, all of it was the same lesson." The teacher turned toward him, sunlight catching his wet hair. All of creation preaches one truth, he said. Be still, and you will see that he was near through it all. The child reached out to touch the water, laughing again as the reflection rippled. It's warm now, he said. The teacher smiled, looking at the sunlight dancing across the surface. Because light always returns, he said. No storm can hold it forever. The group stood quietly as the last drops of rain fell from the leaves, the forest settling into perfect harmony once more. The teacher lifted his eyes to the sky, the wind brushing through his robe. There is a valley beyond these trees, he said softly. A place where the river meets the meadow. There, the air carries the songs of the earth and the whisper of heaven. You have learned to listen through silence and through storm. Now, you will learn to sing. He began walking downstream, the golden light deepening around him. The others followed, their feet pressing softly into the damp soil, hearts lighter, steps steadier. The sound of the river accompanied them, steady, faithful, eternal, and as they moved toward the open valley ahead, the promise of something beautiful waited in the air, like a melody not yet sung. The forest began to thin, the trees giving way to an open space bathed in warm light. The air grew lighter, and the smell of rain-soaked soil shifted to that of wildflowers and grass. Before them stretched a wide meadow, alive with color, golden stalks swaying in rhythm with the wind, tiny petals glistening with drops that still clung to their edges. The river wound softly through it, gleaming like a silver thread woven through green cloth. The group stood at the edge of the clearing, silent, taking in the sight. The young scholar broke the quiet first, his voice almost reverent. It's so open, he whispered. After the forest, it feels exposed. The teacher smiled faintly. Freedom often feels that way at first, he said. The walls of the forest taught you stillness. The storm taught you strength. Now, the meadow will teach you what to do with both. He stepped into the tall grass, the tips brushing against his robe as he walked toward the river's curve. The others followed, hesitant but trusting, until they stood in the middle of the vast field. The sunlight poured down on them, wrapping them in gold. The breeze moved in long, gentle waves across the meadow, bending the grass as if the earth itself were breathing. The teacher lifted his eyes to the horizon. Do you hear it? He asked. At first, there was only the whisper of wind and the faint murmur of the river. Then, slowly, another sound emerged, soft and distant, yet unmistakable. A hum. The air itself seemed to vibrate with it, as if every blade of grass carried a single note in a melody too large for words. The mother pressed her hand to her chest. It's beautiful, she said softly. The teacher nodded. It is the song of the earth, he said. Every living thing that endures joins in it. The trees sing through the wind. The rivers sing through their flow. Even the stones hum beneath the weight of time. Creation never stops praising. The soldier tilted his head, listening closely. And we are part of that song? You always were, the teacher said. You just forgot how to hear it. The scholar closed his eyes, letting the breeze move through his hair. So this is what peace sounds like, he murmured. The teacher smiled, looking around the circle of his companions. Peace has many voices, he said. Sometimes it whispers in stillness, sometimes it roars in thunder, and sometimes it sings through joy. The meadow is heaven's reminder that not all worship kneels, some of it dances. The young man who had once feared stillness sat down among the flowers, his hands brushing through the tall grass. It feels alive, he said, like the earth itself is breathing. It is, said the teacher. The breath of the Creator fills all things. When you breathe with awareness, you join the same rhythm that keeps the stars in motion. The group sat together, listening. The child laughed softly, chasing a butterfly that flitted past, and even that sound seemed to join the song around them. There was no boundary between sound and silence anymore, only harmony. The teacher picked a single stalk of grass and held it between his fingers. The world will tell you that peace is rare, he said, that it must be sought in temples or bought with wealth, but the meadow tells another story. Peace Peace is not rare, it is simply forgotten. He laid the stalk gently upon the water's surface, watching as the current carried it away. And what is forgotten can always be remembered. The scholar leaned forward, his voice quiet but full of awe. How do we carry this with us, Master? When we leave this place, won't the noise of the world drown this song? The teacher turned to him, his expression both tender and knowing. The song does not belong to this meadow, he said. It lives inside you now. Wherever you go, it will go too. The moment you remember stillness, the music returns. The soldier nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Then we don't need to find peace again, he said. We only need to listen. Yes, the teacher said. You need only to remember the voice that speaks even when the world shouts. A hush settled over them once more. The wind slowed, the grass stilled, and for a moment, everything stood suspended in perfect balance. Even time seemed to pause to hear what only the heart could fully understand. The teacher rose to his feet. You have walked far, he said. You have learned silence, endured the storm, found clarity, and now you hear the song. But peace is not meant to be kept hidden in sacred places. It is meant to return with you, to your homes, your work, your days. The young mother looked up. To return? She asked. To the noise, the struggle, the weight of living? Yes, said the teacher softly. Peace that cannot live in the ordinary is not peace at all. The meadow does not exist apart from the forest or the storm. It completes them. You must return, carrying what you've learned until the noise becomes your prayer. The soldier looked down at his hands. And when we forget? The teacher's smile deepened. Then remember again, he said. Peace does not leave you. You only stop noticing it. The wind picked up once more, sweeping through the field like a chorus. The meadow shimmered, bending toward the river, glowing in the last light of afternoon. The group stood slowly, one by one, their faces turned toward the horizon. The teacher raised his hand, gesturing toward the forest beyond the meadow. It is time, he said. The journey ends where it began, among the leaves, where the first stillness called you. They began to walk, the tall grass parting gently as they moved. The sound of the meadow's song followed them, carried on the breeze, fading softly but never gone. And as the sun sank low behind them, the teacher's voice lingered in their hearts. Wherever you go, be still, for he is near. The light was softer now, no longer golden, but a deep, gentle amber that spoke of day's end. The group emerged from the meadow and back beneath the quiet canopy of trees where their journey had begun. The grove felt different now, not because it had changed, but because they had. The silence that once felt heavy was now alive with memory. Every branch, every rustle of wind, every breath seemed to hum with what had been learned here. The teacher stood beneath the same great tree where he had first unrolled the scroll. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappling his face in shifting light. He looked upon those who had followed him, the soldier with softened eyes, the mother with a peace that shone brighter than her fear, the scholar who had learned to listen, and the young man who had found stillness after wrestling with his storms. They stood in a loose circle, uncertain. No one wanted to speak first. The air carried that quiet ache that comes when something sacred nears its end. The teacher broke the silence with a calm voice, low and warm. You have walked far, he said. You have listened, learned, and been made new. But what is learned in stillness must now be lived in motion. You must carry what was found here into the noise beyond these trees. The mother's eyes shimmered. Will you not walk with us? She asked softly. The teacher smiled gently. I have walked with you longer than you know, and I will not leave you. The voice that spoke here in the quiet still speaks wherever hearts are open to hear. The child tugged at his mother's sleeve and looked up at the teacher. Where will you go? The teacher knelt so his eyes met the child's. Deeper into the forest, he said. Where others wander in darkness, there are always those who cannot yet hear the song. Someone must remind them. The boy nodded solemnly, as though he understood. Will they listen? The teacher's smile deepened. In time. Every seed grows when the season is right. He rose and looked around the circle once more. You are not my students, he said. You were never disciples of a man, but mirrors of the word that was already written within you. I only helped you see what heaven had placed there long before I came. The soldier stepped forward, reins still clinging to his armor. And if we falter? He asked. Then rise again, said the teacher. Even the river stumbles against stones, yet it reaches the sea. The Father does not count the falls of those who walk in truth, only the courage to keep walking. The young scholar swallowed hard, his voice trembling. You've shown us peace. But what if the world takes it from us? The teacher's eyes shone like morning. The world cannot take what it did not give, he said. Peace is not a treasure to be stolen. It is a presence to be remembered. When you feel it slipping away, return to stillness, and you will find that it never left. He extended his hand and touched the scholar's shoulder. You have learned to understand, he said, but now you must learn to live what you understand. Knowledge without love is like light that never warms. The scholar nodded, eyes damp. The mother stepped closer, holding her child in one arm. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. The teacher looked at her tenderly. Raise your child in gentleness, he said. Teach him that strength is not in the voice that shouts, but in the one that forgives, that will hold. Be thanks enough. She wept silently, her tears falling onto her child's hair. The teacher brushed one away with his thumb. Even your tears are prayers, he said softly. The young man, once restless, once lost, approached last. His face was calm, his voice sure. I thought stillness meant doing nothing, he said. Now I see it's the beginning of everything. The teacher smiled. Then you have learned the heart of heaven, he said. Stillness is not escape. It is readiness. It is the moment before love moves. He looked at them all once more, the air around him glowing faintly as the sunlight fell through the swaying leaves. Each of you, he said, will go where I cannot. But wherever you walk, walk gently. Wherever you speak, speak truth. Wherever you rest, remember that you are never alone. The wind moved through the grove like a sigh. Leaves fell slowly around them, drifting in lazy spirals. It felt like the forest itself was saying goodbye. The teacher lifted his hand in blessing. May the light that guided you through storm and shadow live always in your hearts, he said. When the world grows loud, return here, in memory, in prayer, in silence, and listen. The same voice that spoke here will meet you there. Tears glistened on every face. The soldier bowed his head, the mother clutched her child, the scholar pressed his hand to his heart. The young man whispered through trembling lips, Thank you. The teacher's smile was gentle, filled with a love beyond words. Peace be with you, he said. He stepped back, and the light around him seemed to brighten. The breeze lifted his robe as if to carry him onward. Without another word, he turned and began walking deeper into the forest, his figure growing smaller between the trees. The last rays of sunlight caught the edge of his robe, then faded as he disappeared among the shadows. The group stood in silence. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the soft hum of the river in the distance. No one spoke. No one needed to. They knew that though he had gone, his presence lingered, woven into the very air, the water, the earth beneath their feet. The scholar finally broke the silence. He's gone, he said quietly. The young man shook his head. No, he said. He's only walked ahead. The mother smiled through her tears, rocking her child gently. And we will follow, she whispered. The soldier looked toward the forest where the teacher had vanished. Then let's walk, he said, his voice steady. Let's carry his peace with us. And so they did. One by one they stepped out of the grove, their hearts filled not with sorrow, but with purpose. The forest seemed to brighten with each step they took, as if every tree remembered the sound of the teacher's voice. Above them, the wind whispered through the leaves, the same wordless melody that had always been there, waiting for those who had learned how to hear it. The forest was quiet again. Evening had stretched its long shadows across the grove, and the air carried that deep, cooling calm that comes after a day of both storm and sunlight. The teacher walked alone now, the voices of his companions still echoing faintly in his memory. The trees rose like pillars around him, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. Each step he took pressed softly into the damp earth, and though the path was familiar, it felt different now, emptier, but not lonely. He stopped at a small rise where the river curved and slowed into a pool of twilight. Kneeling beside it, he cupped his hands and let the water run through his fingers. The reflection that met him was dim, blurred by dusk and movement, but he smiled faintly at it nonetheless. "They have learned," he whispered, as though the water itself could hear him. "They have seen the stillness that gives birth to peace." The forest seemed to listen. The silence around him was alive, pulsing softly like a heartbeat beneath the world. The teacher closed his eyes and breathed in deeply. He could still feel the laughter of the child, the calm in the soldier's heart, the quiet awe in the scholar's questions. They had found what they came for. And yet, he knew their journey had only begun. He looked up toward the darkening sky, the first stars peeking through the thin veil of cloud. "Father," he murmured, "they are yours now. Guard them when the noise returns. Let their hearts remember what silence sounds like." For a moment he stayed still, his head bowed. The night breeze moved through the branches, stirring the scent of pine and rain-soaked soil. He listened not for an answer, but for the comfort of knowing he had been heard. The path of teaching was never an easy one. Every seed planted came with the ache of release. He had walked with them through doubt and wonder, laughter and fear, and now his steps were once again his own. He reached into the small pouch at his side and drew out a few remaining crumbs of bread, the remnants of the meal they had shared in the clearing. He scattered them gently across the water. "Even this," he said softly, "will feed the earth that feeds the soul." The ripples widened, reflecting the faint starlight. It reminded him of how faith spread, one heart touching another, widening outward until it became a tide. He sat back, resting his hands upon his knees. "There are more to teach," he whispered to himself. More hearts still afraid of quiet. A rustle of leaves broke the silence. He turned his head slightly, listening. The sound was soft, footsteps, hesitant but growing closer. For a moment, he wondered if perhaps the forest itself had begun to move. But then he heard it clearly, a rhythm not belonging to the wind or the river. He remained seated, eyes half closed, as the footsteps drew near. "You have followed farther than most," he said, his voice calm but knowing. The sound stopped, behind him. A familiar voice answered, low and uncertain. "I couldn't leave yet." The teacher turned slightly and found the young man standing at the edge of the clearing, the one who had once feared silence but now carried it with grace. His face was thoughtful, his clothes still damp from the day's journey. "I thought you would walk with the others," the teacher said. The young man looked down, then met his gaze. "I did," he said quietly. "But my heart, it led me back here." The teacher studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then you have listened well," he said. "The heart that hears must also obey." The young man stepped closer, the grass brushing against his ankles. "I don't want this peace to fade," he said. "I'm afraid that when I return to the world, the noise will drown it out again." The teacher rose slowly, standing beside the river. "The noise will return," he said. "The storms will come. But peace is not a flame that the world can extinguish. It is a river. It flows beneath everything, unseen, unending. When you cannot hear it, remember that it still runs within you." The young man nodded, though tears welled in his eyes. "And if I forget again?" The teacher placed a hand over his heart. "Then come back to stillness," he said. "You will find him waiting, just as he waits here." The young man bowed his head, tears slipping silently down his face. The teacher looked up once more at the stars, now bright against the dark sky. "You see," he said softly, "even the night does not fear its silence. It carries the light without question." The young man looked upward too, his breath catching at the beauty of it. "It feels eternal," he said. The teacher smiled faintly. "Peace always is." They stood together for a while, neither speaking, just listening to the river's quiet murmur and the distant hum of life awakening in the dark. The young man's breathing steadied, his face softening as calm returned to him. Finally, the teacher turned toward the deeper woods. "There is one more lesson for you," he said. "Not one I can give with words, but one the night will give to those who walk by faith." The young man looked uncertain. "Where does it lead?" The teacher's eyes shone like embers in the dim light. "Where the river disappears from sight," he said, "and yet still flows." He stepped forward into the shadows, his voice calm as ever. "Walk beside me a little longer, and you will see." The young man followed, his steps sure now, the fear that once ruled him replaced with quiet trust. Behind them, the river whispered, and the stars above seemed to shift in gentle rhythm, watching, guiding, waiting. As they walked deeper into the forest, the night air grew colder, but neither felt it. The teacher's voice rose softly once more, half to his companion, half to the heavens above. "When the heart learns to walk in the dark without losing its song, then peace has truly taken root." The young man glanced at him, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint smile. "Then teach me that song," he said, and the teacher answered, "It is already singing in you." Night deepened across the forest, wrapping everything in a soft blue-black veil. The only sound was the steady song of crickets and the whisper of wind moving through the tall trees. The teacher and the young man walked until the path opened into a small hollow, a place where the trees bowed inward, forming a kind of living shelter. In the center, a fire burned low and steady, its light flickering across the bark and roots. The young man stopped at the edge, his eyes drawn to the flame. "You built this?" he asked quietly. The teacher smiled faintly. "No," he said. "It was waiting." The fire crackled softly, casting its warm glow upon the ground. It wasn't large, yet it gave off a steady warmth that filled the hollow completely. The young man moved closer, feeling its heat on his skin. He noticed that the branches above the fire didn't burn, they simply glowed, as though the flame itself respected the life around it. The teacher sat beside the fire and gestured for the young man to do the same. "You have learned silence," he said. "You have endured the storm, and you have listened to the song of the earth. But before you can carry peace into the world, you must learn how to keep it alive within you." The young man lowered himself to the ground, his eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "How?" he asked. "Everything fades, even stillness. I feel it slipping when I leave your side." The teacher picked up a small branch from the ground and held it near the fire. "Peace is like this flame," he said. "It does not fade because it is weak. It fades because we forget to feed it. The heart must become its keeper." He set the branch down gently into the fire, and the flames leapt higher, crackling with sudden brightness. "You see," he said, "it does not take much to keep the fire alive. Only attention, only intention." The young man watched as the flames calmed again, steady and strong. "And what if I grow tired?" he asked. "What if I can't keep the fire burning?" The teacher's gaze softened. "Then you return to the one who lit it," he said. "No flame begins without a spark from heaven. When you feel your light dim, remember, he has not stopped burning." The fire popped, sending small embers spiraling into the air like fireflies. The young man followed them with his eyes, tracing their rise until they disappeared into the canopy above. "I thought peace was quiet," he said. "But this fire, it's alive, loud, moving. It doesn't rest." "Peace is not stillness without sound," the teacher said. "It is harmony in motion. The fire crackles, but it does not destroy. It shines, but it does not blind. When your heart burns with peace, it will move through. The world the same way, bright but not consuming." He leaned forward and placed a hand near the warmth. "Do you feel it?" The young man nodded. "Yes." "That warmth," the teacher said, "is love. Not the fleeting kind born of comfort or closeness, but the eternal fire that burns at the center of all things. Love is what keeps peace alive." The young man was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. Then he said softly, "I used to think love was weakness, that caring too deeply made you break." The teacher looked at him, his eyes illuminated by the firelight. "Love does break you," he said, "but what breaks in love becomes light." The words lingered in the hollow, heavy yet freeing. The young man bowed his head, his heart stirring with something he could not name. I want that light, he said. I want to carry it the way you do. The teacher smiled. Then do as the fire does, he said. Let yourself burn for others, not in anger, but in warmth. Let your peace be their comfort, your kindness, their light. The world grows cold not for lack of truth, but for lack of those willing to burn. He reached beside him and picked up a small scroll wrapped in worn leather. The young man recognized it instantly. It was the same one the teacher had read from under the golden leaves. The teacher held it out to him. You have learned what cannot be written, he said. Now take what is written and let it become living flame in you. The young man hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he received the scroll. I don't know if I'm ready. The teacher's expression was gentle but firm. No one ever is, he said. Faith is not readiness, it is trust. The light you carry is not yours to perfect, only to pass on. The young man clutched the scroll to his chest, feeling the faint warmth it seemed to hold. The fire's glow flickered across his face, revealing both fear and resolve. Will I see you again? He asked quietly. The teacher looked toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to color the sky. You will see me in every sunrise, he said, in every still moment that finds you. I am never far from those who remember peace. The young man nodded, tears glinting in the firelight. Then I'll remember. The teacher placed a hand over his heart. Keep the fire, he said softly. When the world grows cold, let your warmth remind it that heaven still burns. The young man stood slowly, the scroll held tightly in his grasp. The fire crackled once more, brighter than before, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. The teacher's face glowed in its light, serene, certain, eternal. The wind moved gently through the hollow, carrying with it the faint scent of cedar and smoke. The young man looked once more at the teacher, then at the fire, before turning toward the path that led back through the forest. The teacher watched him go, his voice low but steady. Go now, he said. The light will lead you. The young man took his first step into the dawn, the firelight behind him, the horizon ahead. The sound of his footsteps faded into the whisper of the trees, and the teacher remained by the flame, his eyes reflecting its glow as though he too carried its light within. The forest was pale with dawn. Mist drifted low over the roots, curling around the trunks like smoke. The fire that had burned through the night was now only a quiet glow, a soft ember breathing in rhythm with the earth. The teacher sat beside it, watching the young man who stood before him, the scroll clutched tightly to his chest. You have carried peace, the teacher said, his voice low and warm, but now you must carry truth. These are not words meant to be guarded, they are meant to live. The young man looked down at the scroll in his hands. Its leather covering was worn and smooth, marked by the teacher's long journey. It felt heavy, not with weight, but with meaning. What if I fail? He asked. What if I speak and no one listens? The teacher rose to his feet. Then speak again, he said simply. The seed that does not sprout today will still rest in the soil tomorrow. You are not responsible for the harvest, only for the sowing. The young man's brow furrowed. I'm not you, he said. I don't have your words, or your calm, or your strength. The teacher stepped closer, his eyes steady. You were never meant to be me, he said. You were meant to be light in your own way. The fire I tended is the same that burns in you now. It will not speak as I do. It will speak as you must. He placed a hand upon the young man's shoulder. Do not try to imitate the voice of heaven. Let it pass through you as it was given. Truth does not need perfection. It needs presence. The young man closed his eyes, breathing deeply. He could still hear the forest around him, the whisper of wind, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of insects waking to the new day. The same sounds that had once filled him with fear now felt like quiet company. It's strange, he said. The silence used to frighten me. Now it feels full. The teacher smiled. That fullness is peace, he said. The same voice that speaks in silence will speak through you if you let it. He turned toward the dying fire and knelt, stirring the embers gently with a branch until a small flame flickered again. "The fire does not mourn the night that has ended," he said. "It greets the day that has begun. So must you." The young man knelt beside him, the glow of the flame reflecting in his eyes. "Will they understand?" he asked. "Those in the villages, those who've never heard you speak?" The teacher looked into the flame. "Understanding comes slowly," he said. "But love listens even when the mind does not. Speak with love, and you will reach farther than you have. Imagine." He stood once more and faced the east. The horizon was glowing now, streaks of gold and rose breaking through the fading mist. "The sun rises whether the world watches or not," he said. "So too must truth." The young man looked down at the scroll again. His fingers traced the faint lines etched into its leather. "These words," he said softly, "they're sacred." The teacher nodded. "They are," he said, "but not because they are mine. They are sacred because they remind hearts of what they already know but have forgotten. When you speak them, you are not adding to heaven's voice. You are reminding the world of its echo." The young man's eyes glistened. "I'll do my best," he said. "That is all heaven ever asks," the teacher replied. They stood together for a while longer, watching the light grow stronger. The forest shimmered with dew, and somewhere beyond the trees, the river murmured, a song of movement and renewal. The teacher looked at the young man, his expression soft but certain. "The river continues," he said. "So must you." The young man took a slow breath and nodded. "I'll go to the village," he said. "I'll tell them what I've learned. I'll teach them what you've shown me." "Not what I've shown you," the teacher said gently. "Teach them what you have seen. The truth that has lived in your eyes, not just your ears. Speak from what burns within you, not from the ashes of my fire." The young man smiled faintly, the fear in his eyes replaced by a quiet strength. He bowed his head. "Then I'll walk with what I've seen," he said. The teacher extended his hand, palm open. "Go then," he said. "Walk in peace, and wherever you go, may stillness go with you." The young man grasped his hand firmly, holding it for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll return," he whispered. The teacher's smile was faint but sure. "You already have." The young man turned toward the path leading out of the grove. The light caught the edges of his robe as he stepped into the morning. The forest seemed to open before him, the wind guiding him forward. Behind him, the teacher watched in silence, his heart steady, his face peaceful. The sound of footsteps faded, replaced by the quiet murmur of the forest once more. The teacher looked to the sky, now bright with full morning light. "The word moves," he said softly, "and the world will listen." He turned back toward the fire, kneeling once more to feed it. The flames rose slightly, steady and golden, as if acknowledging his prayer. The teacher closed his eyes, whispering, "Let his words burn with life, not memory." Above him, a single leaf loosened from a branch and drifted downward, landing gently upon the fire. It did not burn. It glowed. The teacher smiled. "Peace travels well," he said, and stood once again, walking toward the deeper part of the forest where the light grew faint and the air smelled of cedar and rain. His figure disappeared between the trees, and the last sound to linger was the quiet hum of the living fire behind him. The path from the grove wound down into the lowlands, where the scent of pine gave way to smoke and clay. The young man walked slowly, the scroll tucked safely beneath his robe. Morning had grown into noon, and sunlight poured down in bright, unwavering gold. The trees thinned until the earth opened into a wide valley, dotted with the signs of human life, fields, fences, the faint echo of hammer and song. Ahead lay the village. It was smaller than he remembered from stories, simple homes of wood and stone, smoke curling gently from chimneys. Chickens wandered the dirt paths. Children ran barefoot through puddles from the recent rain. The sound of life was everywhere, rough voices, laughter, hammers, the steady rhythm of existence. The young man stopped at the edge of the village. His heart beat harder now, not from fear of rejection, but from the weight of purpose. He looked down at the scroll in his hands and whispered, "Let me remember the stillness even in their noise." He walked into the village square where people gathered around a well. The sound of his footsteps on the stone drew a few glances, but most went back to their work. A woman filled her jar, a merchant arranged fruit, a child pulled at his mother's sleeve. Life moved, unconcerned. The young man cleared his throat and spoke, his voice steady though quiet. "Peace be upon this place." A few heads turned. The merchant squinted. "Peace?" he said. "You've chosen the wrong village for that." There were laughs, not cruel but dismissive. The young man smiled gently. "Peace does not depend on where it is spoken," he said. "It depends on who listens." The woman at the well studied him with curiosity. "And who are you to speak of peace?" He hesitated for only a moment. "A student," he said. "One who walked with the teacher among the trees." At that, a hush fell. Someone muttered, "The wanderer? The one who spoke to storms?" Another scoffed softly. "Stories," he said. "Old tales to comfort fools." The young man met their skepticism with calm. "Stories," he said, "are how truth keeps breathing." The merchant folded his arms. "Then tell us a story, stranger. But make it quick, there's work to do." The young man smiled, unbothered. "Once," he began, "there was a river that thought peace meant stillness. It refused to move, thinking it could preserve its reflection forever. But in its stillness, it began to dry. When it finally remembered how to flow, it became life again, for trees, for soil, for every living thing that touched it. Peace is not the river's stillness, it is its movement without chaos." The villagers exchanged glances. Some frowned, others listened more closely than they realized. The child beside the well tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama," she whispered, "what does he mean?" The woman knelt and whispered back, "He means that peace doesn't stop moving, little one." The young man smiled. "She understands," he said softly. The merchant snorted, though his voice had softened. "And what of those of us who have no river, no grove, no teacher to guide us? What then?" The young man lifted the scroll slightly. "Then you listen here," he said, tapping his chest. "The same voice that spoke to me speaks to you, not in thunder or miracles, but in mercy, in quiet choices, in how you treat one another." A silence settled over the square. The hammering had stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause between breaths. The young man unrolled a small portion of the scroll and read, his voice carrying just enough to reach every ear. "Blessed are those who bring peace, for they do the work of heaven on earth. Blessed are those who weep, for their tears will one day water joy. Blessed are those who listen, not for words, but for truth within them." When he finished, he looked up. The people were quiet now, not converted, not conquered, but listening, truly listening. The merchant lowered his arms. "You speak well," he said finally, "but words won't fill an empty stomach." The young man nodded. "You're right," he said, "but an empty heart cannot taste even the fullest meal." A few of the villagers smiled at that, others shook their heads, but no one turned away. The woman from the well approached, her jar heavy on her hip. "Eat with us tonight," she said simply. "If your peace is real, let it sit at our table." The young man bowed slightly. Peace always eats where it is welcomed. That night, he sat among them. They shared bread, simple stew, laughter. The child asked him to tell another story, and he did, about the teacher and the fallen branch, about confession in the circle of trees, about the river after rain. Some laughed, some wiped tears without knowing why. As the fire crackled low and the stars gathered above, the merchant approached again. "Your stories," he said quietly. "They stay in the air even after you stop speaking." The young man smiled. "That's what truth does. It lingers." The merchant hesitated, then nodded toward the scroll. "Teach me one line from it," he said. "Something small." The young man unrolled it again and pointed to a verse near the top. The merchant read it aloud, stumbling slightly. "Where there is bitterness, plant kindness, and watch peace take root." He looked up slowly. "That's simple." "It was never meant to be complicated," said the young man. They sat in silence for a while, the fire warming their faces, the night alive with the sound of crickets and distant water. The village that had once met him with skepticism now sat still, not in fear, but in quiet thought. As dawn began to rise once more, the young man looked toward the east. The path stretched on, disappearing beyond the hills. He knew there were other villages, other hearts still waiting to hear the quiet song of peace. He stood, tightening the scroll beneath his arm. "The word is alive," he whispered to himself, "and it keeps walking." He glanced back at the sleeping village, its fires dim, its silence deep, and smiled. Then he turned toward the open road, his feet finding rhythm with the whisper of the wind. The same voice that once spoke through trees and storms now walked beside him once again. The road stretched endlessly ahead, winding through hills that rose and fell like the breaths of the earth itself. Dust clung to the hem of the young man's robe and coated his sandals, but he didn't slow. Each step was steady, measured, a rhythm that matched the quiet voice within him that whispered, "Keep walking." The scroll rested safely against his chest, wrapped tight beneath the folds of cloth. The teacher's words echoed in his memory, as constant as his own heartbeat. Peace is not to be carried, it is to be lived. By midday, the sun had grown sharp and merciless, washing the road in pale light. Ahead, another village appeared, a cluster of small, whitewashed homes built upon dry soil. He approached with a hopeful heart, ready to speak once more. In the square, people gathered around a market stall, trading, laughing, arguing, their voices tangled together in the air like restless birds. The young man waited for a moment, then spoke softly yet clearly. "Peace be upon this place." A few heads turned. One man snorted. "Peace?" he said. "You must be lost. There's no peace here, only work and hunger." The young man smiled, undeterred. "Peace does not wait for full bellies," he said. "It waits for willing hearts." Laughter broke out. A woman at the stall leaned on her basket. "Willing hearts?" she said mockingly. "And what would you know of hearts, stranger? Have you lived through our storms?" The young man's voice remained calm. "I've known storms that tore through the soul, the kind that cannot be seen, but can be felt with every breath." The laughter faded slightly, replaced by murmurs. Some looked uneasy, others folded their arms, unimpressed. He unrolled the scroll and began to read. "Blessed are those who make peace, for they rebuild what anger has broken. Blessed are those who forgive, for they open doors where walls once stood." His words hung in the dry air. For a moment, even the market fell quiet. A few of the older villagers lowered their gaze, but before the silence could deepen, a loud voice cut through it. "Lies!" a man spat. He stepped forward, his face hard and weathered. "Words don't rebuild anything. You talk of peace while we starve. You preach forgiveness to those who've been cheated their whole lives. Tell me, stranger, does your peace fill an empty stomach?" The young man met his glare calmly. "No," he said, "but it feeds the heart that has forgotten how to live." The man sneered. "Then your words are wind." He turned and walked away, muttering. A few followed him, shaking their heads. The crowd broke apart again, voices rising in dismissal, but not everyone left. A few lingered, quiet faces at the edge of the square, watching him with something like curiosity. One of them, an old woman wrapped in a faded shawl, stepped closer. Her eyes were soft, tired. "You speak like the one they call teacher," she said. "I remember his voice." The young man's expression gentled. "Then you already know his peace." Tears welled in her eyes. "I knew it once," she whispered, "but the world grew loud again." He reached out and took her hand, rough and trembling. "Then hear it again," he said. "It was never gone. You only stopped listening." She bowed her head, weeping softly. Others began to draw nearer, the same ones who had stayed behind, their curiosity now mingled with reverence. The young man unrolled the scroll once more. "The heart that forgives is never poor," he read. "The one who sows kindness will harvest strength, and the one who keeps peace will never walk alone." A hush fell again, but this time it was different. The words didn't fade. They settled, quietly, like seeds falling into soil. The young man looked around and saw a few faces softening, a few lips moving silently in thought. Still, some turned away. One man spat on the ground before leaving. Another muttered, "Dreamers and fools." The young man watched them go, his heart heavy but steady. He turned to the woman still clutching his hand. "Some will not listen," he said quietly. "But even their silence is part of the song." She nodded faintly. "You remind me of him," she said. "Not in your face, but in the way your words make me remember who I am." He smiled softly. "Then the word lives." As the sun dipped low, painting the square in gold, he packed away the scroll. A small child tugged at his sleeve. "Sir," she said, "my father says your words are foolish, but I like them." The young man crouched to meet her eyes. "Then let them stay with you," he said. "One day, when the world grows loud, you'll remember them, and they'll sound like a song you once knew." The girl nodded, grinning. "I will." He watched her run off, her laughter ringing across the square. He turned to see the old woman still standing near the well, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Go," she said softly. "Others are waiting for the sound you carry." He bowed his head in gratitude. "Peace be with you," he said. "Peace was always here," she replied, smiling faintly. "You only reminded us to listen." The young man walked away from the village as the sky deepened into dusk. The road stretched out again, dusty and glowing in the fading light. The laughter of the mockers echoed faintly behind him, but so did the quiet hum of hearts newly awakened. He felt tired. His legs ached. His throat burned. But his spirit was steady. The teacher's words pulsed in his memory like the rhythm of the road itself. "The light that endures is not the one that convinces. It is the one that refuses to go out." He looked toward the horizon, where distant lights flickered like stars fallen upon the earth. His steps slowed, his breath deepened. The day had been long, and weariness pressed against him like the evening air. Still, he smiled. He had seen eyes that mocked and hearts that trembled, and both, somehow, were proof that the word still moved. He whispered into the quiet, "Peace still walks." And then he took another step forward, toward the dim lights of the next village that waited beyond the darkening hills. Night came quietly, laying a blanket of deep blue across the land. The young man's feet ached from the road, his robe heavy with dust, yet his heart beat with steady light. The stars stretched wide above him, scattered like seeds across a boundless field. Their glow reflected faintly in his eyes as he walked toward the faint outline of a village ahead. A cluster of roofs resting beneath the hills, their chimneys breathing thin streams of smoke into the cool air. He reached the outskirts as the wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning oil and bread. Windows flickered with dim orange light, and laughter drifted faintly from somewhere deeper within. But among those windows, scattered across the darkened homes, one light stood apart. A single lamp burned in a high window above the quietest street, steady and clear. The young man paused, drawn toward it. Something in that light reminded him of the fire beneath the branches, the one the teacher had tended, the one that never seemed to fade. He walked slowly down the narrow lane, his hand brushing against the cool stone walls, until he reached the house with the shining lamp. The door stood slightly open. "Hello?" he called softly. No answer came, only the gentle flicker of the flame through the small window above. He stepped closer, hesitating, then knocked. The sound echoed faintly. A moment later, footsteps approached. The door creaked wider, revealing an older man holding a small oil lamp. His eyes were weary but kind. "Forgive the intrusion," the young man said, bowing his head slightly. "I saw your light." The man studied him for a moment, then stepped aside. "Few see it anymore," he said. "Come in. The night's cold and the road longer than it looks." The young man entered. The house was small, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and herbs. A woman sat by the hearth, stirring a pot, her hands slow but steady. She looked up and smiled faintly. "Another traveler," she said. "Sit. Eat while it's warm." He bowed his thanks and sat near the fire. The warmth seeped through him, loosening the ache in his bones. "You keep a lamp burning," he said softly. "Even through the night." The old man sat across from him, setting his lamp upon the table. "Yes," he said. "It belonged to my father. He said never to let it go dark. I've kept it lit every night since." The young man smiled. Then you've been keeping watch even when you didn't know it. The man chuckled quietly. Watching for what? Peace, hope? Those things are rare in these parts. Only rare to those who stop looking, said the young man. The woman paused her stirring, glancing at him. You speak like a teacher, she said. He shook his head. No, I'm only a student. The teacher walks deeper in the forest now. Her eyes softened. Ah, she murmured. Then you've seen him. The young man nodded slowly. And heard him. The old man leaned forward, curious. Tell us then, what did he say? The one they call the voice in the stillness. My father told tales, but no one believes them now. The young man reached for the scroll inside his robe, unrolling it gently. The firelight caught the inked letters, turning them gold. He read aloud. Even in the darkest night, a single lamp is enough to guide the lost, and when hearts grow cold, the one who keeps the flame does not burn in vain. The room was silent, except for the crackle of the fire. The woman's eyes filled with quiet tears. We thought no one remembered those words, she said. The young man's voice softened. He remembers everything, every lamp that burns unseen, every soul that still hopes. The world does not forget the light, it simply stops looking for it. The old man exhaled deeply, staring at the flame on the table. We've kept this lamp through storms and hunger, he said. I always wondered if it mattered. It does, the young man said. Every light matters. The darkness may be vast, but it cannot understand endurance. It only knows how to end. Light knows how to remain. He reached out and adjusted the wick slightly. The flame brightened, spilling warmth across the room. Your house, he said softly, is a beacon. The teacher once said the smallest fire in the valley is worth more than all the noise in the city. The woman smiled faintly. Then let it burn, she whispered. The young man nodded, feeling the weight of the scroll against his chest. It already does, he said. They ate in silence after that, each bite slow and reverent, the sound of the wind whispering outside. When the bowl before him was empty, the young man stood. Thank you, he said. Your kindness has warmed more than my body. The old man smiled. And your words, he said, have reminded us why we still light the lamp. The young man bowed deeply. Keep it burning, he said. Others will find their way because of it. As he stepped out into the night, the door closed gently behind him. The glow from the high window spilled across the narrow street, guiding his steps forward. The air was crisp, the stars bright, but that single flame was brighter still, constant, unwavering, alive. He walked on, his feet light despite the miles ahead. The teacher's words echoed again within him. Every light you find, keep it lit, for one day, someone lost will see it and remember home. The young man looked toward the horizon, where a faint shimmer of dawn hinted at the world's waking. He smiled to himself, whispering, Then I will keep walking until the last lamp is found. He pulled his robe tighter, the scroll pressed to his heart, and continued down the winding road that disappeared into the sleeping hills, where the next lesson awaited, quiet and unseen, just beyond the edge of light. The road curved downward into a wide expanse of shadowed land, where the air grew cooler and still. The hills that had once glowed beneath morning light were now fading behind him, swallowed by mist. Ahead stretched a valley that seemed untouched by time, quiet, solemn, and strangely heavy with memory. The young man slowed his pace, his steps careful, his heart alert to the silence that surrounded him. He reached the edge and looked down. Scattered across the valley floor were the remains of old stone altars, some crumbled to dust, others standing half-broken, covered in moss and vines. The air smelled faintly of rain and age, as if prayers once whispered here had soaked into the earth and stayed. He descended the slope slowly, his sandals brushing against the dew-damp grass. The wind barely moved here, and the quiet pressed against him like a living presence. He felt small beneath the weight of it. The scroll at his chest seemed to hum faintly, as though recognizing the place. He approached the nearest altar, a weathered block of stone, its edges softened by years. Upon it rested the remnants of something once burned, charcoal fragments, brittle and gray. He brushed them gently aside, revealing smooth stone beneath. The teacher's voice came back to him from memory. Altars are not built for the sake of sacrifice alone. They are reminders of the meeting place, where the finite touches the infinite. He knelt, laying his hand upon the cool stone. "Who prayed here?" he murmured. "What did they ask for?" The silence gave no answer, but somehow he felt it listen. As he rose, a faint sound caught his ear, the low, wavering tone of a voice. He turned. In the distance, an old man knelt beside another altar, his robe tattered, his head bowed. The young man approached quietly, not wishing to disturb him. When he drew close, the man looked up. His face was lined with years, his eyes clouded but bright. "I heard you coming," the old man said. "Few walk this way anymore." "I didn't plan to," the young man replied. "The path led me here." The old man nodded knowingly. "The paths that lead to forgotten places are the ones heaven draws." He gestured toward the altars scattered across the valley. "These stones were once alive with fire," he said. "People came from far lands to bring their offerings. Grain, oil, tears, even songs. But then the world grew louder. The fires went out, one by one." The young man's gaze moved across the valley, his heart heavy. "And no one returned?" "Some did," the old man said. "They found the ashes cold and thought the silence meant absence. But silence," he said, his voice softening, "is never empty. It only waits." The young man reached for the scroll and held it close. "Then perhaps the waiting is over." The old man tilted his head. "You carry his words." "Yes," the young man said, "but not his voice, only the echo of it." The old man smiled faintly. "The echo is enough." They stood together in the valley, surrounded by the remnants of faith long forgotten. The young man set the scroll down upon the altar and unrolled it carefully. The letters caught the dim light, shimmering faintly as he began to read. "When the flame dies, the ashes remember. When the voice fades, the heart recalls its echo. And when the world forgets, heaven waits." The old man closed his eyes, his lips moving as if in prayer. "I remember that line," he whispered. "He spoke it here long ago. I was a boy. My father brought me to see him." The young man looked at him sharply. "The teacher was here?" The old man nodded slowly. "He stood where you now stand. His fire burned bright that night, though the world beyond this valley was dark. He said, 'Even forgotten altars can burn again.' Then he left, and no one lit the flame after him." The young man's chest tightened. "Then it's time." He knelt beside the altar and gathered what little he could find. Dried grass, bits of fallen bark, a few twigs. He placed them carefully upon the stone and reached into his satchel, pulling out a small ember from the lamp he'd taken at the last village. It still glowed faintly, a stubborn orange pulse of warmth. He placed it upon the altar. The ember flickered, then caught. Slowly, a thin flame rose, wavering at first, then steady. The valley breathed again. The old man's eyes filled with tears. "It lives," he whispered. The young man watched the fire rise, its light reflecting off the stone, off the old man's face, off the broken altars beyond. "No flame ever truly dies," he said. "It only waits for hands willing to remember." The fire spread gently, touching the nearby grass but not consuming it. The air shimmered, and for a moment the valley seemed to glow with something unseen. The young man could almost hear faint voices, the prayers of those long gone, rising once more through the years. He bowed his head. Peace returns to what was forgotten. The old man knelt beside him. "And the forgotten," he said, "return to peace." They stayed until the stars appeared, watching as the small fire burned steadily, its light refusing to fade. The young man finally stood, his shadow long against the flickering glow. The old man smiled up at it. "Where will you go next?" The young man looked toward the northern ridge where the trees grew thick again. "To where he once sat," he said. "The grove still calls." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the fire. "Then follow it, and when you find him again, tell him the altars remember." "I will," said the young man. He turned and began to walk, the fire behind him lighting his path until the valley sank once more into shadow. But this time, it did not feel forgotten. It felt alive again, waiting for dawn. The night wind moved through the grass, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and the quiet hum of prayer. The forest greeted him again with the same calm it had when he first entered it, though everything now seemed sharper, brighter, as if the world itself remembered him. The grove stood waiting, unchanged and eternal. The young man paused at its edge, breathing in the scent of moss and pine, of old earth and rain. The sound of the wind moving through the branches was soft, almost human in its cadence, as though something ancient whispered between the leaves. He stepped forward, the ground damp beneath his feet. The trees around him seemed to hum with quiet recognition. He passed the familiar pool where still water once reflected the sky. It shimmered faintly, rippling as if stirred by unseen hands. The memories of the teacher's voice filled the air, words not bound by time, echoing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Be still and know." The young man stopped. The voice wasn't sound, not in the way wind rustles or rivers speak. It came from within, resonating with a part of him that had been shaped by the journey, the storms, the valleys, the laughter, the tears. He closed his eyes and listened deeper. The forest breathed. He could hear faint phrases drifting through the rustling of leaves, as if the trees themselves were repeating what they had once heard. Each gust carried a fragment of wisdom, a trace of remembrance. Forgive, endure, love without measure. He smiled faintly, lifting his face to the sky. "You're still here," he whispered. The wind moved stronger now, circling him like a living presence. The branches bowed, scattering light through the canopy. For a moment, he could almost see him, the teacher, standing again beneath the great tree, robe stirred by the wind, eyes lifted heavenward. But this time the image didn't bring sorrow. It brought peace. The teacher's voice, clear and calm as dawn, echoed across memory and air alike. Truth does not leave when the messenger does. It changes form and waits to be recognized. The young man sank to his knees, overwhelmed. All this time he had searched for the teacher, thinking peace could only live where he stood. Yet here, surrounded by wind and light, he finally understood. The teacher had never been gone. The word had become wind, and the wind had never stopped moving. He bowed his head, whispering, "Then you were never far." The forest seemed to answer. A single leaf, golden and brittle, drifted down before him, landing in his open palm. Its edges trembled gently, catching the light like a flame. He turned it over, smiling. "Even now, you teach in silence." He rose slowly, gazing around the grove. Every sound, every movement spoke a lesson he now understood. The rustling leaves teaching of surrender, the shifting light revealing patience, the murmuring water reminding him of faith that flows unseen. He spoke softly, not to be heard, but to remember. Stillness isn't a place. It's a way of seeing. He began to walk through the grove again, each step measured, deliberate. The wind moved with him, threading between the trees like a guiding hand. When he reached the clearing beneath the old tree, he stopped and unrolled the scroll once more. The ink was faded in places, but the words shone as if written only moments ago. Peace is not found, it is remembered. Faith is not taught, it awakens. And love is not distant, it is the air we breathe. He read them aloud, his voice steady, carried away on the wind. The forest answered with a soft rustling, as though heaven itself approved. The leaves shimmered, falling like fragments of gold. He closed the scroll gently. "Your words live," he said. "Even the wind keeps them." A quiet laughter stirred within him then, not from pride, but from understanding. He realized that what the teacher had planted was not a single flame, but a forest of them, burning quietly in every soul that had listened. The lesson was not to seek peace, but to become it. He looked toward the horizon, where sunlight began to break through the canopy, pouring down in cascading beams. The light touched his face, warm and steady. He whispered into it, "Wherever I go next, you will walk with me." The wind responded with a gentle sigh, wrapping around him before moving on, weaving through the trees, carrying the echo of his voice into the distance. The grove was alive again, not with noise, but with remembrance. Every tree seemed to whisper the same truth. Peace endures, love returns, stillness speaks. The young man lifted his gaze and smiled. He sat for a while beneath the same great tree where it had all begun. The water nearby reflected both sky and branch, and the air shimmered faintly with the glow of sunset. He took one final look at the scroll resting in his lap. The journey was no longer about carrying words, it was about becoming them. He rose, tucking the scroll beneath his robe, and began to walk toward the far side of the grove. The leaves rustled louder now, swirling through the air, some catching the light and falling slowly around him like soft rain. Each one felt like a blessing, each movement like a quiet farewell. At the edge of the grove, he turned once more. The great tree stood in silhouette, unmoving yet alive, its branches reaching wide as if to embrace the sky. The wind moved through it, singing low and clear. He bowed deeply, whispering, "Thank you." Then he faced the open path beyond the trees, the same path that had once led him here in confusion, now leading him away in peace. The horizon shimmered faintly with golden light, and somewhere beyond it, voices would be waiting, hearts that needed what he had been given. He took a breath, steady and full, feeling the wind at his back. The teacher's words echoed one last time in his heart. "Go and be still wherever you stand." He smiled. "Always," he said softly, and as he walked onward, the grove behind him exhaled, 1,000 leaves descending together, whispering secrets of the unseen. The wind carried them onward, scattering them across the earth like blessings that would never fade. The path wound upward, the forest slowly giving way to open land. The air grew thinner, cooler, filled with the faint scent of dry grass and wind. The young man walked with steady purpose, his robe trailing dust, the scroll pressed close to his heart. Behind him, the grove had disappeared beneath the horizon, hidden by distance and time. Before him rose a hill crowned with light, the last hill before the valley opened to the world again. He reached its base as the first breath of dawn brushed the horizon. The sky was still dim, painted in deep shades of violet and gray, but already the promise of sunrise burned faintly beyond the edge of the world. The hill itself was steep, blanketed in fallen leaves that crunched softly beneath his feet. As he climbed, the wind rose with him, tugging gently at his robe as if urging him onward. When he reached the summit, the world stretched out wide and endless before him. Valleys washed in mist, rivers gleaming faintly in the early light, mountains standing like quiet sentinels in the distance. The young man stood still, breathing deeply. Every step of his journey seemed to echo back to him in the silence. The laughter of the child by the pool, the trembling of the storm, the glow of the fire beneath the branches, all of it had led here. He unrolled the scroll and looked upon the words once more. The ink had faded in places, the edges worn, but each line was still alive, burning faintly in the dawn's glow. He began to read aloud, his voice steady, rising softly into the morning air. "Blessed are the hearts that remember, for memory is the seed of faith. Blessed are those who walk in silence, for they will hear what the world cannot. Blessed are those who love without measure, for they will see the face of heaven even in the dust." His words drifted into the air, carried away by the wind. It was as if the earth itself listened. The grass swayed, the sky deepened with color, and the first light of morning broke over the horizon, a slow, golden unveiling. The young man lifted his eyes. "Teacher," he said softly, "I have spoken as you taught me. I have walked where you led. But what do I do now, when the words are spent?" The wind stirred, gentle at first, then stronger, moving in circles around him. The leaves at his feet rose and spun, their rustling like faint laughter. Then, faintly, not from around him, but within, came the voice he had come to know better than his own thoughts. "You were never meant to keep speaking," it said. "You were meant to become what was spoken." He closed his eyes, tears filling them as the wind pressed against his face. "Then teach me," he whispered, "how to live what I have learned." The voice seemed to smile. You already do. The young man fell silent, letting the stillness settle deep into his bones. The warmth of the rising sun touched his face, and he felt it. That same presence, that same nearness, that same unbroken peace that had followed him through every storm, every valley, every silence. The teacher's words echoed again in his heart. Light does not ask where it shines. It simply shines. He looked out over the valley below. Villages still slept in the morning haze, unaware of the dawn breaking above them. He could see the faint outlines of paths winding between them, the same roads he had walked and others he had yet to see. He smiled softly. "Then I will keep walking," he said, "as long as there are hearts that have forgotten light." The wind gentled, curling around him like a benediction. He reached down and picked up a fallen leaf, crimson, perfect, trembling with the last chill of night. He held it up to the sun and watched as the light passed through it, illuminating its veins like rivers of gold. "Even this," he murmured, "remembers the fire." He placed the leaf upon the ground beside the scroll. Then, kneeling, he whispered a prayer not for himself, but for all who would walk after him, for the weary, the broken, the seekers who would one day find this same hill. "Let them remember," he said softly, "that you are near in every wind, in every flame, in every silence. Let them hear what I heard, the peace that never ends." The light grew brighter now, flooding the valley, washing over the trees, the rivers, the stones. The young man stood once more, the scroll held high. The letters caught the light and shimmered as if written anew. He smiled through his tears, whispering one last time, "Be still. He is near." As the sun rose fully, the wind swept through the hilltop in a great rush, scattering the fallen leaves into the air. They spiraled upward, glowing in the morning light like sparks returning to the sky. The young man stood in their midst, arms open, eyes lifted, bathed in warmth and color and peace. And then, slowly, he began to descend the hill. The scroll remained pressed against his heart, the wind at his back, the light before him. Behind him, the hill shone with the fire of dawn. No temple, no altar, but sacred all the same. As he walked down toward the waking world, he could hear the faintest whisper in the wind, the same voice that had guided him from the beginning. The light does not end here. He smiled, his steps light upon the path. "No," he said softly, "it begins again." And so he walked, down from the hill of returning light, toward the next sunrise, carrying peace into a world still learning how to listen. The sun had long passed its peak when the young man found his way back to the grove. The world below him glowed with the soft amber of evening. The light stretched long through the trees, touching the forest floor like the brush of a gentle hand. Everything was quiet. No voices, no storms, only the steady hum of the earth breathing. He stepped between the familiar trees, each one standing tall and still, their leaves glowing with the last gold of the day. The same pool shimmered ahead, clear and calm, reflecting both the sky above and the face of the one who returned. For a moment, he stood there, unsure whether to kneel or speak. It felt as though the forest itself had been waiting, holding its breath. He reached into his robe and pulled out the scroll. The leather cover was warm against his palms, as though it still carried the memory of the teacher's hands. He sat by the pool, unrolling it carefully until the words rested before him. The ink was faint now, some letters faded completely, but the spirit of the words was alive, whispering louder than ever. He breathed in deeply, the air thick with pine and memory, then spoke aloud, his voice calm, steady, carried by the wind. "Be still, all who wander. Be still, for he is near. When your heart trembles like the sea, remember that his hand steadies both." The sound carried through the grove, bouncing off the bark and echoing softly, as if 1,000 invisible voices joined him. He paused, listening. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt full, like the world itself was leaning in to hear. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not from joy alone, but from understanding. "So it was never about finding you," he said softly. "It was about realizing you were here all along." The leaves above stirred gently, falling one by one, drifting in slow spirals toward the ground. Each one landed without a sound, settling upon the roots, the pool, and even across the open scroll in his lap. He brushed one away carefully and continued reading. Peace is not a gift to be given, but a truth to be remembered. Faith is not waiting for the storm to pass, but knowing who commands the wind. The breeze rose softly as he spoke, curling through his hair and rustling the trees in rhythm with his words. It was almost as if the grove itself breathed them in, each syllable becoming part of the air. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him, the sound of water, the whisper of wind, the gentle rustle of branches. The teacher's voice came to him once more, not in sound, but in memory. One day others will come. They will not seek me. They will seek meaning. You will know what to tell them. The young man looked down at the scroll, his hands trembling slightly. Then let them read, he said quietly. Let them see for themselves. He rose to his feet and carried the scroll to the great tree, the same one beneath which the teacher once sat, the same one whose roots reached deep enough to touch eternity. There, at the base of the trunk, he knelt. He unrolled the scroll one last time, smoothing its surface against the soil. The writing glimmered faintly in the fading light. He pressed his palm against it, whispering, Your words have walked far, Master. Now they will rest where you spoke them first. He stood, stepping back as the evening wind moved through the grove again. The scroll's edges fluttered gently, and for a moment it seemed as though the forest read along. Each rustle of leaf another page turned, each sigh of wind another verse spoken. Above, the first stars began to appear. Their light glimmered faintly between the branches, joining the last golden hues of sunset. The young man tilted his head toward them, whispering, Be still. He is near. The forest seemed to breathe in unison. The wind slowed, the water stilled. The last rays of the sun stretched long and soft across the grove, turning every leaf into gold. And for one perfect moment, time itself seemed to stop. The young man lowered himself beside the tree, crossing his legs beneath him. His eyes were calm, his breath even. He looked at the pool once more, at his reflection, older now, marked by journey and peace alike. He smiled gently. Then let it begin again, he murmured. He picked up a small twig from the ground and traced words into the soil beside the tree. Here the word was spoken. Here it is remembered. Here it will never fade. The breeze rose once more, scattering a handful of leaves over the message. One leaf, bright gold, nearly translucent, landed gently on his shoulder. He looked at it, laughed softly, and let it be. Night came slowly. The stars deepened, countless and clear, their light falling like silent rain upon the grove. The young man stayed seated, eyes half closed, listening to the rhythm of life around him. The forest did not sleep. It hummed with peace, as though the very earth exhaled in contentment. A single thought crossed his mind, simple and whole. He is here. He closed his eyes. The sound of the pool lapping softly, the whisper of wind weaving through leaves, the glow of moonlight upon the scroll. It was all one breath, one truth, one endless act of stillness. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, another traveler would soon find this grove. They would see the scroll, the tree, the fallen leaves. They would sit where he now sat, and perhaps, just as he once did, they would begin to read. And the wind would rise again, the forest would listen, the word would live once more. For peace never ends. It only continues, in silence, in wind, in those who remember to be still.